The great battle outside Harrenhal had unleashed the full fury of dragonfire upon the Lannisters, scattering Tywin's army and granting the northern host a resounding victory. In the days that followed, the charred fields and the fortress's looming towers stood as stark testament to the return of an ancient power. Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen by blood, had brought forth a black dragon from beneath Winterfell. Now the beast brooded near the outskirts of the ruined camp, licking its wounds. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals from its nostrils, as though it still tasted the flesh of the men it had burned. And with that taste came a subtle, simmering tension among the Northmen, many of whom harbored old tales of Targaryen conquest. Yet they could not deny the truth. The dragon had won them the field. Had it not soared overhead, belching flame, Tywin might have stood firm. Instead, Tywin's men had broken apart in terror and confusion. Robb Stark had lost no time consolidating his hold on the land around Harrenhal, while Tywin limped east with a fraction of his once proud army. Now, in the gloom of early morning, the king in the north stood in the burned courtyard of the fortress, poring over a table laden with maps. Jon stood at his right, arms folded, the faint odor of soot clinging to his leathers. They were surrounded by lords of the north and the Riverlands, many of them battered from the recent fight. A few lesser lords and knights had traveled in from surrounding villages seeking audience, and all parted respectfully when Jon or Robb passed. For the new legends of a dragon and a formidable king in the north had spread like wildfire. Roose Bolton lingered near the edge of the table, pale eyes gliding over the charcoal lines on the parchment. Rickard Karstark loomed on the other side, arms crossed, his brow furrowed in thought. The great Jon stood a short distance away, still exulting in their victory, though even he had quieted in the aftermath, sobered by the sight of men blackened to ash. Others, including northern bannermen and a few river lords, muttered among themselves as they waited for Robb to speak. Robb set a palm on the table, voice low and firm. "We've claimed Harrenhal, but Tywin is not yet broken. He has retreated, yes, but with the gold of Casterly Rock behind him, he may regroup. He'll try to form new alliances, muster fresh levies from the crownlands. We cannot afford to sit idle." Rickard Karstark nodded grimly. "He will not rest. The Lannisters are like a wounded animal, dangerous and vengeful." The great Jon let out a rumbling assent. "So we press on, do we not? March to King's Landing and rip the Boy King from his throne." A hush fell. Robb's face tightened. "We have a war to finish, but we must be prudent. The Riverlands remain battered by the conflict. We have allies here, House Tully, House Blackwood, House Mallister, and we have enemies. The Freys remain an unknown element. They aided me once, but their loyalty is a fickle thing. And Lord Walder is no friend to any cause but his own. If we're going to push further south, we need the Riverlands secure behind us. More important still, we need the Vale." That final statement drew a stir among the assembled lords. The Vale was a land of high mountains and impregnable defenses, led nominally by Robert Arryn, the sickly boy lord, but truly governed by his mother, Lysa Tully Arryn. Many doubted her willingness to intervene in a war that seemed so far from her airy perch. Yet all knew the Vale's knights were among the finest in Westeros, second perhaps only to the Reach's famed cavalry. If the Vale joined the northern cause, they would threaten the Lannisters from yet another front, or lend crucial weight to any campaign for King's Landing. Roose Bolton inclined his head. "If the Lady of the Vale consents to join our alliance, Tywin might well decide the cost of fighting is too great. A full host of Vale knights riding in from the east, the north pressing from the west and north, and a dragon overhead, the Lannisters may break." Robb looked at Jon, a silent question in his eyes. Jon understood immediately. It had been Ned Stark's hope that the Vale would stand with the Riverlands, with House Tully, and with the North in times of crisis. Now that Ned was gone, it fell to his heirs, or in Jon's case, to the one who carried Targaryen blood but had been raised a Stark, to encourage that unity. The reality was more complicated. Lysa Arryn had locked her gates against all outsiders, paranoid and fearful. She had refused Ned's pleas for aid after Robert Baratheon's death, and no raven from her had come since the war began. Jon cleared his throat. "With our victory here, Word will spread that we have a dragon and that Tywin was forced to flee. The Vale might be more inclined to negotiate if they believe we're winning. But Lysa Arryn is notoriously cautious. We may need someone she trusts, or a show of strength and good faith. Robb nodded. My uncle, Brynden Tully, called the Blackfish, still commands respect among the River Lords and in the Vale. He served Lysa's husband, Jon Arryn, for years. If anyone can help us bring the Vale into the war, it's him. A spark lit in Jon's mind. The Blackfish was one of the most seasoned commanders in the Riverlands, and a man who had little patience for the dithering of lords. He'd left the Vale after Jon Arryn's death, disgusted by the politics of the Eyrie. Last Jon heard, Brynden Tully was doing all he could to hold Riverrun against Lannister harassment. He had not been at the battle outside Harrenhal, for he was too valuable defending the Tully seat. Now that they had Harrenhal and a momentary advantage, uniting with Brynden might well be their next logical step. We consolidate in the Riverlands first, Robb declared to the group. Send scouts to secure the roads. Make certain Tywin's men haven't set traps or ambushes. Then we march west to Riverrun. From there, we can plan how to bring the Vale into the fold. The Blackfish will know the best way to approach Lysa Arryn, or at least how to speak to her fear. The great Jon pounded a fist on the table. So be it. Riverrun is not far. Let us link with the Blackfish and show him our new friend. He jerked his thumb in the general direction of the Black Dragon, which at that moment let out a distant snort that reverberated through Harrenhal's crumbling walls. Karstark shifted his weight. We must keep the dragon healthy. Rumor has it some archers landed a few arrows in its hide. If it can't fly, we risk losing our greatest asset. Roose Bolton's lips curved into a thin smile. I've already assigned some men to gather salves and supplies. Let us see how tough dragonflesh truly is. Jon said nothing. A flicker of unease wound through him. He had pulled out a few of the arrows himself, seeing the oozing wounds. A dragon was no mere horse or hound. Trying to treat it with normal bandages seemed laughable. Still, ignoring its injuries was out of the question. Each day the beast grew stronger, more accustomed to flight. If infection took hold, all might be lost. He silently vowed to check on the creature again before they departed. Robb dismissed the War Council soon after, having settled on the broad strokes of the plan. The lords scattered to ready their men, salvage what supplies they could from Harrenhal's battered stores, and prepare for a rapid march west. Before all could leave, Robb called Jon aside into a quiet alcove. The thick stone walls of Harrenhal towered around them, the ruin of a once majestic seat of power. Robb exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand along the stubble on his jaw. We'll leave a token force here, enough to hold the fortress if Tywin tries some desperate gambit. The place may be cursed, but it's a strategic asset. Once we've secured the Riverlands, we can decide whether to hold it or leave it as a ruin. Jon nodded. The stories say that Aegon the Conqueror's dragons melted Harrenhal's towers. Our black friend could probably finish the job if we wished. A ghost of a smile crossed Robb's face. Fire and blood, indeed. Then his humor faded, replaced by the same quiet determination that had seen him through so many battles. I want to speak plainly with you, Jon. Or should I call you Aegon now? Jon's stomach tightened. They seldom brought up his true parentage outside a handful of trusted individuals. Jon is fine, he answered, keeping his voice low. The men follow me as Ned Stark's son, or at least as a Stark bastard. That is simpler than the truth. Robb arched an eyebrow. But are we not nearing a point where your Targaryen claim could matter? The Vale might be swayed by the notion of a true Targaryen allied with a Stark. They hated the Mad King, but Jon Arryn supported Robert's rebellion for love of your father's father. It's complicated. There could be power in your name, especially if we wish to show the realm a new order that merges Stark and Targaryen legacies. Jon shrugged uneasily. Perhaps. Or perhaps they'll reject me as an abomination. You know how the North feels about Targaryens. Some men are unsettled enough by the dragon alone. I worry that if they learn my father was Rhaegar, they'll see me as a threat to your claim. Robb's jaw set. I don't see you as a threat, Jon. You are my brother in all the ways that matter. Our alliance is stronger if we stand together. But you're right. Let's not proclaim your parentage too loudly, at least until we see what shape the realm takes after we break the Lannisters. If we do break them, Jon heard the reluctance in Robb's tone. Breaking the Lannisters was easier said than done. But the tide had turned. They had hammered Tywin's host outside Harrenhal. If they rallied the Riverlands and brought the Vale on board, King's Landing would stand vulnerable, especially now that the Lannisters had only a boy king in Joffrey and few stalwart allies besides the Tyrells, if the Tyrells chose to remain loyal. Rumor said Renly Baratheon had once courted Margaery Tyrell's hand, but that was all uncertain. The politics of the South were a nest of vipers. Robb laid a hand on Jon's shoulder. We march tomorrow at dawn. Be ready. Jon inclined his head. I will, and I'll see to the dragon's wounds before we go. They parted ways. Jon navigated the labyrinthine corridors until he emerged onto a broken battlement overlooking the courtyard. From this vantage, he saw Harrenhal in all its sad grandeur. Twisted towers melted by dragonfire centuries ago, courtyard walls half collapsed, and the uneven ground littered with the debris of old bones and rotting timbers. Here and there, stark banners fluttered over the ramparts, a gray direwolf on an icy field, proclaiming that the fortress belonged, for now, to the king in the north. Jon's gaze drifted beyond the walls to where his dragon sprawled in the tall grass. The beast had prowled all morning, snapping at crows that hopped near the carcasses of fallen foes. A group of soldiers had tried to clear the field of bodies, but with so many corpses, the task was monumental. He climbed down a set of winding stairs and out a side gate to the open ground. A few watchers, wearing House Umber and House Manderly colors, stood at a respectful distance, keeping an eye on the dragon. They parted for Jon, faces tense with a mixture of awe and unease. As Jon approached, the dragon lifted its head, black scales shimmering in the noon sun. Arrows still protruded from two spots, one near the base of the long neck, the other in the membrane of the left wing. Jon swallowed, remembering how the beast had roared when it was struck in battle. With slow, measured steps, he came closer. Easy, Jon murmured, though he doubted the dragon understood his words so much as the tone. The beast exhaled a puff of smoke, nostrils flaring. Jon spotted dried blood caked around the arrow shafts. The skin around them was cracked, faintly oozing a dark fluid that must be the creature's blood. The smell was sharp, almost metallic, tinged with the sulfurous odor of the dragon's breath. Carefully, Jon reached out to place a hand on a scale near the embedded arrow. The dragon hissed, a low rumble that vibrated through Jon's chest. He held his ground, projecting calm and empathy. I need to remove it, he said softly. It will fester otherwise. One of the Umber men, a broad fellow with a short beard, stepped closer, carrying a makeshift metal rod. My lord, he said to Jon, I've heated this in the forge if you need to cauterize the wound after you pull the arrow. Jon grimaced. The idea of pressing hot steel to the dragon's flesh seemed risky, but infection would be worse. He accepted the rod. Another man offered him a set of large pincers. Drawing a steadying breath, Jon said, Stand back, all of you. If it lashes out, I don't want any casualties. The soldiers retreated. Jon turned to the dragon and set the pincers around the arrow near the wing membrane. Slowly, he worked it loose. The dragon jerked in pain, letting out a feral snarl, and Jon nearly lost his grip. He gritted his teeth and twisted, pulling the shaft free. A spurt of that dark, steaming blood followed. The stench made Jon's eyes water. The dragon roared, a great plume of flame escaping its throat. Men dove for cover, shouting in alarm, but Jon remained still, knowing that running would only provoke the beast further. Once the arrow was out, he dropped it to the ground. He reached for the heated metal rod, which glowed faintly orange at one end, and pressed it against the torn membrane. The dragon's scream reverberated across the field. For an instant, Jon feared the creature would incinerate him. Pain hammered through the air in the dragon's bellow. But after a tense moment, the beast settled, trembling, smoke curling from its jaws. Jon hurried to the second arrow, the one lodged near the base of the neck. This was trickier because thick scales surrounded that spot. He maneuvered the pincers, finding a gap in the armor-like hide. "Steady," he whispered again. Sweat trickled down his temples. The dragon's golden eye rolled in pain or panic. He twisted the arrow once, twice, until it came free with a gout of blood. The stench was stronger here, the wound deeper. Again, he used the hot rod, pressing it to the torn skin. The dragon convulsed, letting out another roar that shook the earth. Jon's ears rang. He heard metal clang behind him, likely the watchers dropping their weapons to cover their ears. When the cauterization was done, Jon staggered back, panting. The dragon hissed, half lowered its head, but did not attack. Carefully, Jon approached again and laid a hand on an uninjured stretch of scale, a gesture of reassurance. He could feel the tremor in the dragon's body, the fury at being pained, the confusion of being tended by a mere mortal. Their eyes met, and Jon willed all his regret for the creature's suffering into that gaze. After a moment, the dragon blinked, then exhaled a puff of hot air across Jon's face. Jon looked over his shoulder. The watchers behind him slowly straightened, swords and spears in hand, expressions astonished. One said in a hushed voice, "The dragon tolerates him. 7 hells, the stories are true." Jon felt a flicker of relief. The black dragon's wounds would heal, he hoped. He had done what he could. Over time, the new scar tissue might hamper flight a little, but it was better than letting an infection claim the beast. He set the heated rod aside, nodded to the watchers to keep a respectful distance, and wiped sweat from his forehead. The next day or so would be delicate. The dragon would be in pain, and an injured beast was often more volatile. By dawn the following day, the Northmen and their Riverlands allies were on the march. A small garrison of a few hundred men remained behind at Harrenhal, instructed to hold the fortress for as long as they could, though few envied them the duty of guarding a place so steeped in death. Robb led the main host westward, determined to reach the Tully stronghold of Riverrun before Tywin or any remnant of Lannister forces could threaten it again. Alongside Robb rode the Great Jon, Rickard Karstark, and other northern lords, their banners fluttering in a mosaic of direwolves, suns, and bears. Jon kept near the rear or sometimes rode on the flank. The black dragon advanced in fits and starts, at times loping along the ground, at times gliding short distances overhead. It was not the elegant flight one might imagine from a fabled Valyrian beast, but its wings were healing, and the newly dressed wounds oozed less. Whenever it landed, it would rest for an hour or two, and the army adjusted its pace around the creature's needs. Although some men grumbled about the slow progress, they dared not voice their complaints too loudly. The memory of Dragonfire devouring Lannister ranks was still fresh in their minds. As the northern host wound its way through the burnt and war-ravaged Riverlands, they began encountering refugees and broken men, half-starved villagers who had lost everything in the roving storms of conflict. Robb ordered that bread and salt be shared when possible, that outriders keep an eye out for bandits. Meanwhile, rumors of the Stark host traveling with a dragon spread like a whispered myth. Some villagers approached in awe, kneeling when they saw the massive beast lumber by. Others ran in terror, certain that the new Targaryen in the realm meant fresh devastation. Jon felt uneasy at the sight of their fear, recalling that the Targaryens of old had sometimes ruled by terror. He had not asked for that legacy. Yet here he was, astride a cause that used Dragonfire to secure victory. On the 8th day of travel, they reached a broad, winding river that marked a key crossing into Tully territory. Beyond the far bank rose a patchwork of farmland, and in the distance, the red walls of Riverrun's stout castle glinted under the sun. It was a sight that stirred the hearts of those who had once called House Tully their liege. Robb's mother, Catelyn, was a Tully by birth, and while she was not with them now, having remained in the field or perhaps gone to try negotiations with another faction, this journey felt like a homecoming of sorts for her kin. The approach to Riverrun was peaceful, with no signs of Lannister outriders. The fields near the castle showed signs of prior clashes, scorched patches of grass, broken barricades, arrow-studded palisades. But for the moment all was calm. As the Stark host drew near, Banners of the leaping trout rose on the ramparts. The outer gates swung open, and mounted riders bearing the Tully sigil emerged to greet the king in the north. Brynden Blackfish Tully rode at their head, posture erect despite his graying hair. He wore well-worn armor, and his expression was one of grim satisfaction at seeing Robb Stark in the flesh once more. Close behind him came a contingent of riverlords, some older knights, a few younger squires, and men bearing House Bracken, Blackwood, Vance, and Mal Lister colors. They reined in their horses at a respectful distance, gazing upon the black dragon that circled overhead once, shadows flitting across the grass, before landing in a thunderous swirl of dust. The blackfish swung down from his horse. He stood before Robb, inclining his head. "Your Grace." His voice was tinged with relief. "We heard rumors of Harrenhal and the dragon. I see they were no exaggeration." Robb dismounted, clasping the older man's arm. "Uncle, it warms my heart to see you well. I feared the Lannisters might have battered Riverrun into submission." Brynden snorted. "They tried more than once, but they never mustered enough men to break our walls, and we used the Red Fork's natural defenses as best we could. We did lose men, though. Edmure was wounded in a skirmish, but he's recovering." Robb frowned. "Is my uncle Edmure able to stand? We'll need him." The blackfish's eyes flicked to the side, as though measuring how much to say before the assembled men. "He's not bedbound, just weak. The arrow that struck him was tainted, likely with poison, but he'll survive. He's resting in Riverrun's keep now." Robb released a breath. "Good." Then he gestured to Jon. "You know my brother, Jon Snow?" Brynden Tully shifted his gaze to Jon, eyes narrowing. "I do. You were quite the quiet boy, if I recall, though you're not so much a boy anymore. Word says you brought a dragon out of some frozen crypt in Winterfell." Jon inclined his head. "Yes, my lord. We found it, and 5 eggs, though only one has hatched in living memory. Now it fights for the north." A ghost of a smile touched the blackfish's lips. "I never thought to see the day. Well, let me not stand on ceremony. Riverrun's gates are open to you, King Robb, and to you as well, Jon Snow, and to the entire northern host. We have stores enough to feed your men for a time, though I suspect you'll want to keep moving. I'm eager to hear how you plan to break Tywin and save your sisters. There's rumor the girl Sansa is still a hostage, and your younger sister is missing." Robb's eyes clouded with worry. "All of that we'll discuss in the hall. For now, let's settle the men and see them fed. We've marched long and hard." The blackfish gestured to his companions, and soon the allied forces were guiding the northern column through Riverrun's gates. A great bustle ensued as men set up tents in the surrounding fields, stable hands corralled horses, and quartermasters arranged the distribution of food. The black dragon, at Jon's urging, alit on a flat stretch of ground near the moat, far enough from the castle walls to avoid spooking the defenders. Soldiers watched it warily from a distance, crossbows at the ready in case it decided to rampage. Jon found himself in a swirl of activity, helping direct the wagons, ensuring the wounded were guided to Riverrun's healing ward, and advising men on how to manage the restless dragon. Hours passed before he could slip into the castle's main hall, where Robb and his bannermen had gathered around a long table. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows across tapestries depicting House Tully's proud lineage. At the head of the table sat Robb, the king in the north, with gray wind curled at his feet. Brynden Tully took a seat of honor to Robb's right, while Rickard Karstark, the Great Jon, Roose Bolton, and a smattering of riverlords found their places as well. Jon entered quietly, took a seat near Robb, and felt the hush that fell as he did so. The presence of the black dragon in their midst, if only outside the walls, made everything more charged. Robb surveyed the gathering. "We stand in Riverrun thanks to your efforts, uncle," he said to Brynden. "Thank you for holding the line while we battered Tywin at Harrenhal. Now, as we know, Tywin has fled with some remnants of his host, presumably east or southeast. Our scouts lost his trail. He may be heading toward King's Landing or trying to link with another Lannister detachment." Brynden leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. He may try to coordinate with the phrase. Old Walder changes allegiance like he changes robes. But I've had no sign that Tywin actually sought out the twins yet. Walder is opportunistic. He might just as easily hold Tywin at bay unless promised a fortune. Roose Bolton's quiet voice interjected. We cannot dismiss the possibility that Walder Frey sees a chance to side with the Lannisters if it suits him. He's cunning. We should ensure he does not have that chance. Robb grimaced. Indeed. But first we must ensure the rest of the Riverlords stand with us firmly. You've done well, uncle, but the war has sapped their strength. We must unify them fully. Then we turn to the Vale. We need their knights. Lady Lysa Arryn is your niece, Uncle Brynden. Will she listen to you if you go to the Eyrie? The Blackfish sighed. Lysa is complicated. Fear rules her heart, especially fear for her boy, Robert. She believes the Vale's isolation is its best defense. She wanted no part of the War of the Five Kings. Even Ned Stark's execution did not stir her to join your cause. If I go to her alone, she might shut the gates and keep me prisoner for even suggesting the Vale march to war. But if we offer her something, security, or a show of such overwhelming force that she believes the Vale will not be threatened, she might relent. The Great John slammed a fist on the table. Then let's show her the damned dragon. That'll make the Vale quake. Brynden shook his head. Frightening her is as likely to make her double down on her isolation. She must be convinced that King's Landing is a greater threat to her son, or that Tywin's vengeance will not spare the Vale if she remains neutral. Rickard Karstark spoke next, his voice grim. So we must prove to her that aligning with the North is her best hope of survival. Yes, Robb said. And if she will not yield, we find another means to secure the Vale's knights. Perhaps a marriage alliance, though the boy Robert Arryn is far too young for, say, Sansa. He cut himself off, face clouding with grief for his captive sister. In any case, Lysa likes to bargain with family ties. My mother once said Lysa would do nearly anything if she thought it kept her child safe. Jon, who had stayed mostly silent so far, cleared his throat. We can't ignore the possibility of sending a smaller diplomatic party to the Eyrie. One that includes the Blackfish, but also a show of force. A few hundred men, perhaps a glimpse of the dragon, but not so overt as to terrify them behind their impenetrable gates. We let them see that we are strong, that we have the power to protect or to destroy, but that we choose alliance. The Blackfish regarded Jon with a hint of approval in his eyes. That might be workable, especially if I lead the negotiations and you remain in the background. Lysa knows me, and if I can assure her that all we want is her cooperation, her knights in the field, then maybe we can get her to open the Vale's passes. But traveling to the Eyrie is not easy, especially for a dragon. The Great John barked a laugh. Dragons can fly, can't they? Can it carry riders high over the mountains of the moon? Brynden asked, looking sharply at Jon. Jon thought of how the black dragon's flight remained clumsy, uncertain. The beast had grown stronger in the past weeks, but scaling the high peaks of the Vale was no small feat. I'm not sure. I suspect it can, given time, but we have only tested short flights so far. The injuries are healing, but it tires quickly. We risk the dragon crashing in the mountains if it's not strong enough. Karstark frowned. That would be a disaster. Brynden nodded. Then we attempt a ground approach. The Vale's passes are well guarded, but we can bring a modest force and a retinue for show. If we succeed, we march the Vale's knights out to join the main host. If we fail, I might be imprisoned or executed, and your dragon might be stranded outside the bloody gate. Robb drummed his fingers on the table. The alternative is to ignore the Vale and hope we can take King's Landing without them. But that invites Tywin to rebuild or the Tyrells to rise against us. Victory at Harrenhal notwithstanding, we cannot fight all corners of the realm. If Stannis or Renly Baratheon emerges with a claim, we face an even bigger quagmire. Better to have the Vale on our side. Roose Bolton's cool gaze swept the room. Then let us do it. Consolidate the Riverlands, ensure Walder Frey does not shift allegiance, and then send an embassy to the Eyrie. It's the best chance we have. A murmur of agreement passed through the gathered lords. Robb leaned forward, shoulders heavy with responsibility. First, we help Riverrun rebuild and reprovision. Then we deal with Walder Frey. As for the Vale, we'll plan an approach that doesn't spook them into shutting their gates. Uncle Brynden, you'll command that mission. Jon, you may be needed as well if the dragon is up to it. Having a living Targaryen or rumored Targaryen might intrigue Lisa. She's always been curious about power. Jon's pulse beat a bit faster at that idea. Did Robb want him to reveal his lineage to the Lady of the Vale? He recalled that Lisa Arryn loathed the Lannisters for the death of her husband Jon Arryn, but she had never openly moved against them. Could the specter of Targaryen vengeance finally stir her from her caution? He nodded. If that's your wish, your grace, I'll do it. Let's hope Lisa sees reason. The conversation shifted to specifics. How many men to leave with Robb? How many to march with the Blackfish? Which riverlords could be trusted to keep the peace? How to handle the disquieting rumors that Walder Frey might be making overtures to the Lannisters. All of it blurred together in Jon's mind. He was used to the battles and the direct confrontations, but these negotiations, forging alliances, and balancing the concerns of dozens of lords weighed on him. He saw the strain in Robb's eyes, a young man forced to act as king before he even fully grew a beard. At last, the meeting adjourned, lords filing out to see to their duties. Brynden Tully remained behind to speak privately with Robb. Jon headed into the bailey to check on the black dragon again. He found it perched by the moat, half dozing. A stable hand approached nervously, bowing. "We've brought some livestock for it, my lord," he said, "but we're running low on cattle. Will it eat fish?" Jon suppressed a smile at the thought of a dragon rummaging in the rivers for trout. Likely it would, but it'd need a tremendous amount of fish. Better we keep it on livestock for now. We'll see about gathering supplies from the farms that remain intact. Inform me if there's trouble. The stable hand bowed again, scurrying away. Jon settled on a low stone wall near the dragon, letting the midday sun warm his face. His body was weary from travel and the tension of tending the dragon's wounds, but his mind refused to rest. He recalled the nights at Castle Black, back when his greatest worry had been a wildling raid or the hostility of men like Alliser Thorne. How trivial that seemed now, in the face of a war that might tear the Seven Kingdoms apart. His thoughts drifted to the question of his heritage. Maester Aemon had insisted he was Aegon Targaryen, the long-lost son of Rhaegar. Each time he looked at the black dragon's molten gold eyes, he felt a subtle chord of connection, as though their blood shared a hidden music. But was he truly destined to restore House Targaryen? Or was this beast simply a fluke, a relic of a bygone age awakened by chance? Ned Stark had named him Snow. He had been raised in the ways of the North. Even now, he felt more Stark than Targaryen, though the dragon beneath his hand told a different tale. The wind shifted. The dragon opened its eyes, fixed them on Jon. He rose, stepping closer to run a hand along its scales. The creature's side rose and fell with deep breaths, each exhalation tinged with heat. Here was a power that once conquered kingdoms and toppled dynasties. And here he was, a man called Snow who might be a prince. The swirl of possibility weighed heavily on him. That night, Riverrun's great hall was alive with the sounds of feasting and cautious celebration. The Tully kitchens had scraped together enough stores to roast several boars and an ox, along with baskets of bread, fish, and the first decent ale many men had tasted in weeks. Soldiers crammed the lower tables, laughing and boasting of Harrenhal's triumph. At the high table sat Robb, the Blackfish, Rickard Karstark, and the senior lords of the Riverlands. Jon joined them, though he ate sparingly. Too much weighed on his mind to enjoy the meal. Cups clinked in toast after toast. To the king in the north, to the memory of Ned Stark, to the battered but unbowed Riverlands, to the unstoppable Black Dragon. Yet there was also an undercurrent of anxious chatter about Lisa Arryn, about Tywin's next move, about the seemingly endless war. Jon caught snippets of conversation about Joffrey's cruelty, about the ephemeral power of Renly or Stannis, and about the fates of the Stark girls in King's Landing. Midway through the meal, Robb rose from his seat. Grey Wind stood beside him, ears perked. The hall quieted, all eyes on their king. "My lords," Robb began, voice carrying in the hush, "we stand on the brink of a new chapter. House Stark and House Tully have bled together to hold these lands. We have inflicted heavy losses on Lord Tywin, and we have proven that the North is not to be trifled with. But our war is not done. My sisters remain in the clutches of the Iron Throne, that so-called King Joffrey who murdered our father. Tywin Lannister cowers somewhere to the east, plotting his next move. And the Vale stands silent, uncertain whether to join us or hide behind its mountains." Men muttered, some pounding fists on the table in agreement. Robb lifted his cup, glancing at the Blackfish. "Ser Brynden Tully has agreed to lead a mission to the Vale. He will go with a modest force, bearing my word to Lady Lisa Arryn. We ask for her knights, for the strength of the Vale's cavalry, to aid us in delivering justice to those who have wronged our families and this realm. We do not seek to force her hand, we seek alliance. If she spurns us, then we shall face that consequence as well. But let no man here doubt that the combined might of the North, the Riverlands, and the Vale would be enough to break the Lannisters for good and restore peace." A cheer rose from some corners of the hall. Others remained silent, uncertain. Robb's gaze shifted to Jon. "And we have another advantage. My brother Jon has awakened a beast of legend, a black dragon, which now stands with us. Let the realm tremble, for no fortress can long withstand dragonfire. We will use this power wisely, not as tyrants, but to protect our own from the tyranny of King's Landing." The cheering grew louder, though tinged with an undercurrent of fear. Jon felt a flush creep into his cheeks as men turned to him, raising cups and calling out praise for the Dragon of the North. He forced a faint smile and inclined his head, wishing he felt more worthy of their admiration. The memory of burning men outside Harrenhal still haunted him. Robb lifted his cup higher. "So let us feast this night for our victory, and on the morrow we prepare for the next step. The Riverlands shall be made whole again, and the Vale invited to join our righteous cause. By the old gods and the new, we shall see justice done." The hall erupted into thunderous applause. Robb drained his cup, and the merriment resumed in earnest. Servants rushed to refill trenchers, while musicians struck up a lively tune. The great Jon led a boisterous call for more ale, bellowing about how the dragon's roar was music compared to Lannister screams. A few men danced with serving girls near the corners. Others debated tactics, or bragged about how many foes they had slain at Harrenhal. Jon sat quietly, nibbling at roast boar, lost in his own thoughts. He knew a summons to the Vale likely awaited him. Robb wanted him to accompany the Blackfish, to be a living symbol of power that might sway Lisa's timid heart. The idea made him uneasy, but if it brought an end to the war more swiftly, perhaps it was worth the risk. He wondered how the Vale's mountain passes would accommodate a giant, half-wounded dragon. Would the beast even come willingly? It had followed him so far, but the heights might challenge its newly mended wing. And if something went wrong, if the Vale archers loosed a hail of arrows, Jon could picture the carnage all too easily. After a time, he excused himself from the high table, leaving the hall to find a quieter corner of the courtyard. There, in the moonlight, he breathed in the cool night air, letting it clear his head. Ghostly reflections glimmered on the surface of the moat, and the silhouette of the black dragon loomed near the far wall. Torches cast dancing light across its scales. Some men said the beast stood guard, as though protecting the castle. Others claimed it was simply too large to fit comfortably anywhere else. Jon approached, half expecting the dragon to be asleep, but its eyes glowed softly in the darkness. He placed a hand on its flank, feeling the slow rise and fall of breath. "We might soon climb the heights of the Vale," he murmured. "Will you trust me in that?" The dragon's tail twitched, but it made no sign of alarm. Jon let his hand drift to the newly healed scar on its wing, where the arrow had been removed. There was still a raw patch, though the heat of infection had receded. He felt the subtle warmth under his palm. Each beat of the creature's heart resonated in his bones. He was about to step away when a voice spoke from behind him. "Jon!" said Rob quietly. Jon turned. Rob stood a few paces off, his cloak swaying in the night breeze. Gray wind prowled at his side. The wolf's eyes shone red in the torchlight. "Have you had enough of the feast?" Jon nodded. It felt loud. "I needed air." Rob stepped closer, arms crossed. "I understand. Victories used to taste sweeter. Now they're just steps toward a larger conflict. Tywin is wounded, not dead. My sisters are lost. The realm is fracturing around us." Jon studied Rob's face, seeing the weight of leadership etched into it, lines of worry that had not been there a year ago. "You're carrying a heavy burden," Jon said. "But you're doing right by the North and by Father's memory." A flicker of sadness passed over Rob's features. "I hope so." Then he took a breath, glancing at the dragon. "I wanted to tell you, I've spoken with the Blackfish. He's set on riding to the Vale in a fortnight, maybe sooner if the roads are clear. He wants you there with the dragon. He thinks it will help overshadow the Eyrie's defenses, or at least keep the Vale lords in line." Jon's heart thudded. "And the plan for me to keep quiet about my parentage remains?" "For now," Rob said. "Yes, there may come a moment when revealing it is useful, but that moment is not now. Whether you go by Snow or Targaryen, you're still the man who fought at my side in the Whispering Wood, at Harrenhal, who awakened this beast beneath Winterfell. The realm speaks of you as the Dragon of the North. That's enough." Jon nodded, though a swirl of conflicting emotions churned inside him. Perhaps it was enough. Perhaps he did not need to claim the Iron Throne or invoke Rhaegar's name. But old questions remained. If the war ended and Joffrey was dethroned, who would sit on the Iron Throne? Rob had been crowned king in the North, and the Northern lords would not yield that lightly. Would the Seven Kingdoms be sundered for good, or reassembled under some new arrangement? Rob seemed to sense his unease. He let out a small sigh and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "We'll figure out the shape of the realm once the Lannisters are dealt with and we have our family safe. One step at a time." Jon lowered his gaze. "That's wise. First, we must see how the Vale responds. If they join us, Tywin will have nowhere to run." "Indeed." Rob gave him a faint, tired smile. "You should rest, Jon. The Blackfish wants to set out on a survey of the roads tomorrow. If you're going with him, you'll want to see what path leads to the Vale's bloody gate." Jon inclined his head. "I'll be ready." Rob turned to go, then paused. "Thank you, Jon, for everything." And with that, he strode back toward the castle, gray wind patting silently at his side, leaving Jon alone with the dragon and the quiet hush of the Riverrun night. At first light, the courtyard teemed with activity. Pack horses snorted as men loaded them with supplies, outriders awaited final orders, and the great Jon led a boisterous group heading out on a different errand, something to do with scouting the Red Fork's upstream villages. The Blackfish beckoned Jon to accompany him on a ride beyond Riverrun's walls, where they would assess the roads that twisted toward the Vale. They wanted to see if any Lannister remnants lingered, or if brigands had taken advantage of the chaos. Jon rose from his pallet, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles from days of riding. He donned his leathers, strapped Longclaw at his hip, and made for the courtyard. Brynden Tully was already mounted on a sturdy gray mare, surveying a small retinue of riders wearing Tully and Stark livery. The man nodded at Jon. "Ready?" the Blackfish asked. "We'll do a circuit east and north, see how passable the roads are. That region's been harried by Lannisters and outlaws alike." Jon glanced around for the dragon, spotting it perched near the moat. "Should I bring our friend?" Brynden shook his head. "Best not. Can't leap to every minor errand. If trouble arises, a score of mounted swords should suffice, and we can always send for help. Besides, I suspect we want the beast well rested for the Vale. Let it hunt or doze as it pleases." Jon nodded, though part of him felt uneasy leaving the dragon alone. Then again, no one in their right mind would try to harm the beast unless they commanded a small army, and even then it might end in flame. He mounted his horse, falling in beside Brynden. They spurred their animals out of Riverrun's gates, crossing the drawbridge and following a narrow dirt track flanked by battered farmland. Broken fences and scorched huts stood as grim reminders of war. The retinue rode in silence for a while. Jon took in the devastation. Villages lay half-abandoned, fields untilled. Crows perched on skeletal remains of barns. Bryndon's face hardened as he surveyed the wreckage. "This was good land once," he muttered. "Now it's a husk. We Tullus were always proud of our domain." Ned Stark understood the Riverlands as the heart of the realm, its breadbasket. And look what has become of it. Jon imagined Ned's kindly gray eyes, how he would have mourned to see people suffering so. It stoked Jon's resolve to end the war quickly. "We'll rebuild," he said, though he wondered how. Men could not plant seeds amid armies and dragons. "If we can bring the Vale Knights in, Tywin won't be able to raid here again." They pressed on, stopping briefly at a small hamlet where a handful of villagers remained. The Blackfish dismounted to speak with them, learning that Lannister scouts had passed through a fortnight ago, stealing what little food remained. A group of outlaws, possibly men who deserted from the Lannister host, had also harassed the region. Brynden told them the war was turning, that King Robb held Riverrun, that the dragon had scattered Tywin's host at Harrenhal. Some villagers brightened at the news. Others seemed too traumatized to trust any rumor of hope. From there, they rode north, crossing a low, rickety bridge over a narrow tributary of the Red Fork. Brynden led them to a vantage point atop a small ridge. From the crest, they could see the faint silhouette of mountainous terrain in the far distance, the beginning of the Vale's formidable range. The roads from here forked. One route skirted the foothills, eventually climbing toward the Bloody Gate, the Vale's southern entrance. Another wound east toward the plains that led to the coastal White Harbor routes. Brynden pointed with a gloved hand. "Up that pass is how we'd approach the Eyrie," he said. "But it's narrow, and Lisa likely has scouts posted near the gate. If we come in large numbers, she'll see us a mile away." Jon let his gaze trace the winding path. "We plan to bring a few hundred men, correct? Enough to show strength without seeming an invasion." Brynden nodded. "Yes, we'll need to position them so that Lisa's watchers don't panic. Perhaps half remain in a safe camp below the gate while I ascend with an envoy to speak with her. You and the dragon, if it's strong enough to fly overhead as a demonstration, but not so close as to threaten. I suspect that's the balance we need." Jon recalled the Vale's precipitous cliffs, the mountain strongholds. It's possible the dragon could land near the Eyrie if the terrain allows. But it's risky. The updrafts might help it gain altitude, but if it can't handle the flight, it might crash into a ravine. Brynden shrugged. "We'll decide once we're closer. For now, the road looks passable. No sign of Lannister patrols here. Let's continue west a bit, then circle back to Riverrun. I want to see if any Reavers remain in the area." They carried on, making a loop through the region. At one point, they encountered a small band of ragged men with crude weapons, likely local brigands or deserters turned outlaw. The retinue dispatched them with little trouble. Jon cut down 2 who tried to rush him, their eyes wild with desperation. The rest fled into the woods. Brynden scowled, ordering his men to give chase, but the outlaws scattered, knowing the terrain. In time, the Tully riders gave up pursuit. They had gleaned enough to know this land was plagued by scattered criminals, a byproduct of war. By late afternoon, they returned to Riverrun. The castle bustled with new arrivals, riverlords from further afield, bringing wagons of supplies now that they sensed the war might turn in their favor. Rumor spread that Walder Frey had sent an envoy to speak with Robb, though no one knew the details. Jon and Brynden parted ways in the courtyard. Brynden went to meet Robb in the Great Hall, while Jon headed for the moat. He felt a pull toward the Black Dragon, as though needing to reassure himself the beast was still there, still healing, still their greatest advantage. He found the dragon crouched near the water, lapping at it with a long, forked tongue. Soldiers maintained a safe perimeter, though a few curious souls had edged closer. One man, noticing Jon's approach, stepped back and bowed. "My Lord Snow, it's eaten 2 goats today and slept for most of the afternoon." Jon nodded. "Good. Keep the stable hands on alert if it grows restless. I suspect the next few days will be quiet for it. Soon enough, we travel to the Vale." He stepped forward, letting the dragon sense his presence. The beast gave a low rumble, but it did not roar or spew flame. The wound on its wing looked better, though a dark scab replaced raw flesh. Jon gently stroked the creature's side, feeling the tension in the muscles. He murmured soft words, half nonsense, half reassurance. He could not claim a Targaryen's mastery of dragons from birth, but he had grown up loving the dire wolves of the Starks, creatures of fierce loyalty and savage strength. Perhaps the principle was the same, a bond of mutual respect, forged in adversity. He stood there, dwarfed by the dragon's bulk, listening to it breathe. The Vale beckoned with all its perils. If they secured that alliance, they would have the greatest cavalry in the Seven Kingdoms supporting them, plus the unstoppable terror of a dragon overhead. King's Landing would tremble. Perhaps Sansa would be freed, perhaps Arya found, perhaps Ned's death avenged. A part of Jon thrilled at the notion. Another part recoiled, fearing that each victory would be stained with more ashes and screams. And always there was the question of what lay beyond the war. If Joffrey fell, if the Lannisters were crushed, if the Vale Knights joined them, if the Tyrells or Baratheons did not interfere, who would rule the realm? Robb wanted to be king in the north, separate from the Iron Throne. That left a vacuum in King's Landing. Would it be Stannis or Renly or Jon himself if his Targaryen claim emerged? He shut his eyes, swallowing against the confusion. One step at a time, he reminded himself. First the Vale, then the war's end. After that, the realm's shape might take care of itself, or tear itself further apart. Days passed in a flurry of preparations. Robb and the Blackfish visited local lords, ensuring each committed men and resources to the northern cause. A small group traveled to the Twins to meet with Walder Frey's envoy, seeking to reaffirm the old promises and quell any betrayal. Meanwhile, Jon oversaw the dragon's care, ensuring it was well-fed and had space to practice short flights. The scab on its wing continued to mend, allowing the beast to fly higher each day. At times it soared over Riverrun in lazy circles, stirring awe and a bit of terror in the townsfolk below. Finally, the day came when Brynden Tully declared it was time to set out for the Vale. Their party numbered about 300 horse, drawn from Stark, Tully, and Mallister men, plus wagons carrying provisions. They would take a cautious route, following the foothills to the Bloody Gate. Once there, they would present themselves to the Vale's defenders. If Lady Lisa refused them entry, they would parley outside the gate, or, if all went ill, attempt a show of force with the dragon overhead. Robb would remain in the Riverlands with the larger army to keep watch over Tywin's movements and to manage the frays. Jon found himself at the head of the column with the Blackfish on the morning of departure. The sun gleamed on the red fork, painting the water gold. Robb stood on the ramparts, gray wind at his side, watching them depart. He raised a hand in farewell, and Jon lifted an arm in response. Then he spurred his horse forward. The black dragon, as though sensing the shift, launched itself into flight above the courtyard. Men shouted encouragement, half cheers, half nervous exclamations as the creature's wings snapped open, catching the wind. It circled once over Riverrun, then soared east, a monstrous silhouette against the morning sky. The column filed out of the gates, crossing the drawbridge into the wide world. Jon glanced up at the dragon, which gradually descended to a lower altitude, as if waiting for him to lead the way. Brynden Tully gave an approving nod. Perhaps the realm truly has changed, if we see a Targaryen beast heading to treat with the Vale in the name of a Stark king. Jon smiled wryly. We'll see if they greet us with open arms or closed gates. So began the journey to the Vale. They rode through devastated farmland, then up into rolling hills, passing weary villages. The black dragon often flew ahead, frightening travelers on the roads or sending deer bolting into the woods. At night, they camped in clearings where the beast could settle, and the men formed a perimeter with torches to keep curious animals and outlaws at bay. Brynden Tully insisted on a brisk pace. He wanted to reach the foothills in under a week, ensuring Lisa could not claim ignorance of their arrival for too long. One evening, Jon walked among the tents, checking on the men. He found a squire feeding the horses, listened to soldiers gossiping about how the dragon might melt the Eyrie's famed stone towers if Lysa refused them entry. Others nervously recalled the days of the Mad King. Jon assured them that was not their intention. They sought alliance, not carnage. Yet he knew if Lysa raised her archers, they might have no choice but to retaliate. That night, sleep came fitfully. He dreamed of standing on a narrow mountain trail, overlooking a sea of clouds. The black dragon perched on a crag nearby, roaring at fortress gates carved of pure ice. A woman's voice echoed in the dream, calling him Aegon, telling him he must open the gates or freeze forever. He reached out, but the fortress melted into flame, leaving only ash. He jolted awake, heart pounding, disoriented by the moonlight filtering through the tense canvas. A few days later, the party reached the point where the hills rose into steeper terrain. They followed a winding track along a rocky spine. The air grew cooler, and pine trees replaced the broadleaf forests of the lowlands. Scouts reported no sign of Lannister patrols, though they found old footprints that might belong to mountain clans. The Vale was famous for its warrior clans that harried travelers who dared approach the Eyrie. Brynden Tully seemed less concerned about them than about Lysa's watchers. "We'll likely see a Vale outrider soon," Brynden predicted one morning, guiding his horse around a fallen log. "If so, we announce ourselves politely. The last thing we need is them thinking we're invaders." Jon nodded, casting an eye skyward. The black dragon soared overhead with a lazy flap of wings, drifting on thermals that rose from the mountainsides. The scabbed wound looked better, and it seemed the altitude no longer bothered it as much. Jon felt a strange pride at seeing the creature adapt. Sure enough, by midday, they spotted figures on a high ridge, glinting in the sun. "Vale scouts," one of Brynden's men called. At once, the Tully riders raised their banners. House Tully's Trout, House Stark's Direwolf. Brynden himself rode forward, accompanied by Jon and a handful of men. The watchers on the ridge did not descend. Likely they had orders to remain aloof until they conferred with superiors. That evening, as they made camp near a small mountain lake, a party of Vale knights approached under a flag of truce. Jon and Brynden went out to meet them. Their leader was a slender man in plate armor etched with falcons, the sigil of House Arryn. He introduced himself stiffly as Ser Ardes Waynwood. His pale eyes flicked with obvious nervousness toward the black dragon perched on a rocky outcrop across the lake, shimmering in the dying sunlight. "My Lord Tully," Ser Ardes said, bowing formally to Brynden. "We had not expected so large a party. Lady Lysa Arryn wishes to know your intentions in the Vale." Brynden returned the bow. "Ser Ardes, you know me as the Blackfish. I served with Lord Jon Arryn for many years. I come now on behalf of King Robb of the North, seeking an audience with Lady Lysa. We wish to propose an alliance against the Iron Throne and the Lannisters, who murdered Lord Eddard Stark." Ser Ardes's features remained guarded. Lady Lysa has always maintained that the Vale is best served by neutrality. She regrets the kingdom's tragedies, but the Eyrie stands safe from the horrors of war. Jon felt a flash of frustration, though he kept silent. Brynden pressed forward gently. "I assure you, war will find the Vale if the Lannisters emerge victorious. Tywin Lannister spares no land that defies him. We have proven ourselves at Harrenhal, and we bring with us a persuasive advantage." He gestured at the distant shape of the dragon. Ser Ardes's throat bobbed. "So the rumors are true. There is a dragon in your midst." Brynden nodded. "It will be used to end this war quickly, but we need the Vale's knights to ensure the Lannisters have no route of escape. Lady Lysa and her son Robert would be far safer as allies than as potential next targets." Jon could see the knight wrestling with his orders. Lysa clearly wanted to remain isolated, but the presence of a dragon changed the calculation. At last, Ser Ardes inclined his head. "Very well. I shall inform Lady Lysa of your request for parley. We will await you near the Bloody Gate tomorrow at midday. You may bring a small escort. The rest of your men must camp a league away." Brynden exchanged a look with Jon, then nodded. Agreed. Ser Ardes hesitated, gaze flicking to Jon. Is this the rumored Targaryen, or a Stark bastard? We hear many tales. Jon felt a twinge of discomfort. I'm Jon Snow. The dragon fights for the north, and we mean no harm to the Vale if Lady Lysa chooses to stand with us. Ser Ardes pursed his lips, but said nothing more. He and his men rode off, disappearing into the rocky pass. Brynden exhaled. She'll greet us, if only to glean more information about the dragon. The real question is whether she'll open the Vale to us or shut the gates. I suspect she'll want to see it with her own eyes. Jon considered the steep cliffs. I'll be careful if I bring it near the gate. One volley of arrows from the ramparts could ruin everything. Brynden nodded gravely. Yes, we walk a tightrope here. That night, Jon hardly slept, troubled by the possibility that the Vale might reject them, forcing a standoff that would end in bloodshed. He woke before dawn, stepping out of his tent to check on the dragon. The beast sprawled on a ledge near the lake, eyes half-lidded in the starlight. Jon quietly approached, feeling the crisp mountain air sting his cheeks. The dragon's breath emerged in visible puffs of heat. Tomorrow we meet the Vale, he whispered, resting a hand on the dragon's side. Will you show them your strength without burning them to cinders? The beast shifted, a deep rumble vibrating through its flank. Jon managed a half-smile. I'll take that as a maybe. When morning came, they broke camp, leaving most of the men behind as instructed. Brynden selected 50 riders to accompany him. Jon was among them, though he told the black dragon to remain out of sight until called. A few archers stayed with the creature, both to guard it and in case it went on a rampage. Once the smaller party was ready, they advanced toward the Bloody Gate, a famous defensive choke point in the Vale. Towering cliffs rose on either side, and the only path lay through a narrow gorge. Stone walls and ramparts spanned the gorge, forming a gatehouse that was nearly impossible to assault. As they neared, horns sounded from above. Vale knights manned the ramparts, pikes glinting. Brynden halted the party within earshot. Ser Ardes Waynwood emerged at the gate, flanked by a half-dozen lords and knights wearing Arryn sigils. He lifted a hand in greeting. Lord Tully, you are recognized. Lady Lysa Arryn invites you to speak with her at the Eyrie. But only you, Jon Snow, and a small handful of knights may pass the gate. The rest must remain here. Brynden turned to Jon and quietly said, It seems she wants to meet us, but not risk letting a larger force inside. Fair enough. But will you fetch the dragon? Jon paused, eyeing the cliffs. Perhaps I should keep it in reserve. If Lysa sees it in the sky, it might terrify her into shutting the door. Let me hold it back until we know how she responds. If she's open to alliance, we can show the beast as a sign of power, not a threat. Brynden agreed with a grunt, then raised his voice to Ser Ardes. Very well. I and Jon Snow shall come. We'll each bring 2 knights for our protection. The rest will wait here. A tension-laden silence followed. Then Ser Ardes nodded. You may pass. They advanced under the watchful eyes of archers lining the ramparts. Once inside the gate, a narrow, winding road led them deeper into the mountains. The Eyrie perched high above, a white castle said to be unassailable. Jon's stomach nodded as they climbed. The road twisted along precipices that dropped hundreds of feet. Far below, the rest of their party and the black dragon waited. He prayed no hasty signal from Lysa would prompt her knights to rain arrows down on the beast. After several hours, they reached a plateau where the Eyrie's looming silhouette cut against the sky. White stone walls soared, turrets reaching for the clouds. The wind whipped across the heights, making the narrow path treacherous. Brynden pressed forward, face set in determination. 24 knights in Arryn colors greeted them at the gates. Ser Ardes was among them, maintaining a tight-lipped politeness. Lady Lysa awaits you in the high hall, he said. We've prepared quarters for your knights. They will remain here until your audience is concluded. Brynden nodded. Understood. Jon dismounted, swallowing hard as he craned his neck to take in the lofty battlements. He could almost feel the weight of Lysa's paranoia pressing down on them. Guards escorted them through a series of gates, across a courtyard that overlooked the Vale's breathtaking vistas, then into the inner keep. The air was thin, making Jon slightly lightheaded, or perhaps it was the tension in the air. Soon, they climbed a spiral staircase, flanked by marble columns. A final set of doors swung open, revealing the high hall of the Eyrie. The space was airy, with tall windows that let in the pale daylight. The floor gleamed of polished stone. Jon's eyes were drawn to the famous moon door, a narrow opening in the floor that overlooked a dizzying drop into the sky and jagged rocks below. Executions in the Eyrie were carried out by making the accused fly through that door. Brynden had told him tales of it long ago. At the far end of the hall stood Lady Lysa Arryn, robed in blue and white, her auburn hair streaked with gray. She clutched the hand of a thin, pale boy, her son, Robert, the Lord of the Vale. The boy looked about 8 or 9, with sunken cheeks and eyes that flicked nervously around the room. A small retinue of Vale lords stood nearby, House Royce, House Corbray, House Waynwood, among others. All looked tense. Lysa studied Brynden and Jon with wariness in her eyes, though she forced a smile. "Uncle," Lysa said, her voice pitched high, "it's been too long since you left the Vale. You return now at the head of an army, accompanied by tales of a dragon." Brynden inclined his head. "My lady niece, I return not to threaten, but to entreat you. The realm is at war, the Lannisters have murdered Ned Stark, and King Robb leads the North to defend his people. We Tullis stand with him. We ask the Vale to do likewise. The Lannisters will not spare you if they triumph." Lysa clucked her tongue. "The Lannisters are far from here, uncle. The Eyrie stands beyond their reach. We want no part of their savage wars. My late husband, Lord Jon Arryn, never wished to spill Arryn blood in a Targaryen conflict. And now we have rumors of a Targaryen beast raised in the north. How am I to trust that it will not turn upon us?" Brynden's jaw tightened. "That Targaryen beast has delivered us from the Lannisters' might at Harrenhal. It is the key to ending this war swiftly. Lady Lysa, the Vale is not safe as you think. Once Tywin recovers, or if King Joffrey or his mother Cersei sees you harboring Tullykin, do you think they'll allow you to remain neutral? They'd demand your boy as a hostage or worse." At that, Lysa recoiled. Her hand tightened on Robert's. The boy whimpered, burying his face against her robes. She stroked his hair, glaring at Brynden. "You will not speak of my child so lightly, uncle." Brynden softened his tone. "I apologize. I speak only out of concern. The Vale's isolation worked for a time, but war is a tide that eventually reaches every shore." Jon stepped forward, conscious that eyes were upon him. "My lady, I am Jon Snow. I was raised by Ned Stark, and I stand with King Robb. The dragon serves us, but not to conquer. We seek your alliance to break the Lannisters and rescue Sansa Stark, Ned's daughter, from King's Landing. Surely you remember your sister Catelyn, your niece Sansa? Will you leave them to the Lannisters' mercies?" Lysa's eyes flickered with a swirl of emotions. Fear, bitterness, perhaps guilt. "My sister wrote me, begging for help, but that was before the war truly erupted. It is tragic, yes, that Sansa is lost in King's Landing, but why must we sacrifice our knights for a cause that does not concern the Vale? The boy on the Iron Throne is no threat to us. We hold the Eyrie. No army can conquer us here. Not by climbing your mountains," Brynden said quietly, "but a dragon could fly over them. If the Lannisters somehow gained a dragon of their own, they have none." Lysa snapped, her voice echoing in the hall. Robert flinched at her tone. She took a breath, forcing composure. "No, they do not. But you do, apparently. So how do I know you won't turn it on us if we displease you?" Jon felt the knot in his chest tighten. He realized now that Lysa might be just as afraid of them as of the Lannisters. She saw the dragon as a threat to her and her son's rule. He tried a different tack. "My lady, you remember your husband's sense of duty. Jon Arryn served as hand to King Robert because he believed in preserving the realm's peace. That peace is shattered now. The Lannisters hold the throne. If you stand aside, they will only grow bolder, eventually punishing all who refuse to kneel. The north is already in open rebellion. The riverlands are ravaged, and your nephew Robb means to free the realm from Lannister tyranny. Will the Vale hide while the rest of Westeros bleeds? Lisa opened her mouth to retort, then paused, eyes flicking to the nearest Vale lords. Some looked troubled, as if they believed the North had a point. Others remained sternly loyal to her. She drew herself up. I protect my son. That is my paramount duty. If the Vale's knights ride forth, we risk losing thousands. Risk opening the Eyrie to infiltration. Our home has never been taken by force. Why risk that now for a war so far away? Brynden glanced at Jon, then back to Lisa. War is not far away, my lady. It's on our doorstep. Harrenhal is not so distant. King's Landing is not so distant. You have kin in the Riverlands who suffer. You have Ned Stark's daughter in the Lannisters' clutches. You would truly stand idle? Robert Arryn whined, tugging at his mother's robes. Mama, I'm tired. Tell them to go away. I want to make them fly. Lisa stroked his hair, her gaze drifting to the moon door. Hush, sweetling. These are our guests. Before Brynden could speak, one of the Vale lords stepped forward. Lord Royce, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache. Lady Lisa, might we at least entertain a demonstration of the dragon's power? If King Robb's envoys claim it can end the war swiftly, perhaps we should see it in person. Confirm that it is no hoax or exaggeration. Lisa looked as though she had swallowed something sour. That might be arranged, she said at length. Then she eyed Brynden. Will you summon this dragon to the Eyrie, uncle? Fly it over our walls to intimidate us. We mean no intimidation, Brynden said carefully, though they all knew intimidation was part of the strategy. But yes, we can bring it near, let you see it from a safe vantage. You'll see it obeys Jon Snow. If the Vale stands with the North, that same power will protect you from Lannister retaliation. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line, but the uncertainty in her eyes was telling. Very well, a demonstration. Ser Ardes shall arrange a vantage point outside, near the mountainside. If you attempt any trickery, know that our archers are the finest in the Vale. Will not hesitate to strike your beast or cast you out the moon door. Robert snickered. Yes, the moon door. Brynden gave a curt bow. We accept your terms, my lady. They left the high hall, escorted by guards, Brynden's expression grim. Outside, in the courtyard, they conferred in low voices. She's more frightened than I expected, Brynden muttered. But that fear might drive her into our arms if we show her we can be the bigger shield. Jon recalled the plan. Keep the dragon at a slight distance, so as not to provoke panic. He wondered if that was even possible. The Vale was a labyrinth of cliffs and narrow roads. One misstep and the dragon might crash into a ravine, or it might appear too threatening and prompt Lisa's men to fire. Yet a demonstration might be the only way to sway her. They rode back down the winding road toward the Bloody Gate, sending word ahead for the Black Dragon to circle above but not approach too close. Jon had told the archers guarding the beast to watch for a specific signal. A single flaming arrow shot into the sky. When they neared a wide plateau where a Vale tower stood, Ser Ardes and a handful of lords waited with Lisa and young Robert, brought in a litter, accompanied by a half-dozen maidservants. The day was bright, the wind brisk. The plateau offered a sweeping view of the surrounding mountains and valleys. Lisa clutched Robert's hand as they disembarked from the litter, her gaze darting nervously. Guards took up positions around her. Brynden and Jon halted at a respectful distance, their own men behind them. The tension in the air was palpable. Ser Ardes stepped forward. You propose a demonstration? Brynden nodded. Yes, Jon Snow will signal for the dragon to fly past. No attacks, no flame. Just a pass so you can see it is real and commanded by us. All eyes turned to Jon. He drew a breath, heart pounding. He took the small bow from his saddle, nocked a specially prepared arrow wrapped in cloth soaked with pitch. One of Brynden's men lit a torch, holding it out. Jon set the arrow aflame, feeling the heat singe the hair on his forearm. Then he lifted the bow, aimed high over the plateau, and loosed. The arrow streaked upward, trailing black smoke and flickers of fire, until it vanished into the crisp blue sky. Moments passed, each one dragging like an age. Then, distant at first, the sound of beating wings reached their ears. A dark shape emerged from behind a peak, growing rapidly as it soared closer. Gasps and cries rippled through the Vale lords. Lysa's eyes went wide with something like terror or wonder. Robert hid behind her skirts, peeking out with fearful fascination. The black dragon swooped into view, the sunlight gleaming off ebony scales. It let out a roar that echoed across the mountains, sending a flock of startled birds flapping away. Lysa's men stirred, some raising crossbows. Brynden gave a sharp order to hold, and, to their credit, they complied. The dragon angled its wings, gliding in a grand arc above the plateau. Its tail streamed behind like a swath of living night. Jon silently urged it not to spit flames. Let it be enough to show presence, not threat. As if sensing Jon's intent, the dragon merely roared again, no fire issuing from its jaws. It swept lower, the wind of its passing rustling the men's cloaks. Lysa clung to her child, trembling. Some Vale knights muttered prayers. The beast circled once more, then rose on a powerful updraft, ascending into the sky. It was magnificent and terrifying, a living testament to power from a lost age. Even Brynden stared in open awe. At last, the dragon glided over a distant ridge, out of immediate view, though its roars still echoed faintly. Jon's pulse thundered in his ears. The demonstration had gone better than he feared. No one had shot at the dragon, no one had died. He turned to Lysa, whose face was ashen. Robert whimpered at her side. That was... Lysa struggled to find words. Brynden seized the moment. That is the weapon the North wields against the Lannisters. Stand with us, Lady Lysa, and the Vale shall never fear Tywin's wrath. Together, we can restore peace and dethrone the false king who murdered Ned Stark. Lysa's lips trembled. She hugged Robert protectively. The Vale lords behind her exchanged urgent whispers. At last, she took a shaky breath. I cannot deny the dragon is real, nor that your cause is just in seeking to avenge Eddard Stark. But I must consider the safety of my son. Lord Royce stepped forward, bowing to Lysa. My lady, with all respect, we cannot remain locked away if the realm is unraveling. The dragon changes everything. If the Lannisters lose, they may lash out at the Vale. Better we choose the winning side now. Another Vale lord, a lean man with stern features, Ser Vardis Egen, nodded. He speaks truly. The boy King Joffrey is despised. If Tywin fails, the crown cannot protect us from the wrath of a new Targaryen beast. But if we stand with the North, we share in their shield. Lysa drew herself up, glancing from Brynden to Jon, then at the receding shape of the dragon. She swallowed. Very well, she said, her voice wavering. I will not see my son executed by whichever side emerges victorious. The Vale will open its gates to King Robb's envoys. We will discuss how many nights we can spare. But I swear this. If you ever threaten Robert or the Eyrie, I will cast you all through the moon door. Relief coursed through Jon. Brynden exhaled, inclining his head. Agreed, Lady Lysa. So it was done. The Vale was not yet wholeheartedly committed, but Lysa had yielded enough to negotiate. The Knights of the Vale would soon ride under the Falcon banner, side by side with the wolf and trout, perhaps even behind the black dragon's shadow. It was a fragile alliance, held together by fear and family ties, but it was an alliance nonetheless. As they made their way back down the narrow road, Brynden's expression was pensive but hopeful. She'll haggle over details, but we've crossed the biggest hurdle. Lady Lysa Arryn will not remain idle now. The Vale will enter the war. One more step toward victory. Jon gazed up at the mountains, half expecting to see the black dragon perched on a distant peak. But the sky was empty except for the rolling clouds. In his heart, he felt an odd mixture of triumph and dread. They had harnessed a dragon to force the realm's hand, to bend lords and ladies to their will. Felt necessary, felt like justice. Yet as they rode away, he could not help but wonder how long it would be before the realm turned its gaze upon him, the man who might be Aegon Targaryen, and demanded to know what shape his rule would take once the war was done. For now, at least, the Vale was theirs, and with it, a sharpened blade angled at the Lannisters' throat. The war would soon surge toward King's Landing with renewed ferocity, and in that coming storm of steel and flame, Jon knew the truth of who he was, and who they all would become would be decided. Jon watched the great black dragon circle through a bank of clouds above the Vale, its wings beating with a slow, majestic power. In the weeks since the meeting with Lady Lisa Arryn, the creature's arrow wounds had all but vanished. Where scabbed patches had once marred the creature's hide, now only faint, scar-like lines remained, each ringed with a darker shade of scale. More unsettling was the subtle glow in the dragon's eyes, a smoldering red that had grown stronger each day. Rumors whispered among the men that some ancient magic coursed through its veins, granting it an uncanny resilience. The arrow-pierced membranes of its wings had knitted themselves with startling speed, and even the small scars that remained looked tougher, as if the beast's hide was evolving after every injury. Roose Bolton, never shy with morbid observations, had remarked that the dragon seemed to thrive on violence. With each battle, each wound, it returned stronger than before. Others whispered in hushed tones that the beast was not ordinary but perhaps a manifestation of fire itself, a herald of darker forces. Jon could not deny that the dragon was changing. He felt it every time he brushed his hand over its scales. There was an electric charge, a strange warmth he did not fully remember before Harrenhal. And though the beast still let out the same thunderous roars and breathed its searing flame, something about the quality of its presence had grown heavier, almost oppressive. Several days had passed since their success in swaying the Vale to an alliance of sorts. Though Lady Lisa remained cagey, she had formally declared she would join her forces with those of King Robb Stark, on the condition that her son, young Robert, never be placed in direct danger. An unspoken tension lingered in the air. Everyone knew the Vale's knights might show up late or withdraw if Lisa's fear overcame her sense of duty. Yet the mere announcement of the Vale's alignment with the North and Riverlands had caused ripples across the war-torn realm. News traveled fast by Raven, and scouts returned from surrounding territories reporting that pockets of Lannister men now avoided the mountain passes entirely, unwilling to risk tangling with Vale cavalry or a dragon's scorching wrath. Jon found himself at the edge of a high, craggy overlook in the foothills of the Vale, the chilly wind slicing across his cheeks. Behind him, a small encampment bustled with Northmen, Vale knights, and a sprinkling of river lords, an uneasy mix at the best of times. The black dragon landed with a crash behind Jon, throwing up a swirl of dust and debris. Its newly hardened scales caught the slanting morning light, gleaming like polished obsidian. The smell of sulfur and heated air drifted around them. Jon turned to face it. The dragon's eyes glowed that unsettling red, and the beast let out a rumble that shook small stones loose from the cliff face. Most men kept their distance, but a few of the bolder knights had inched closer over time, lured by curiosity. There was no question now that the creature was not a typical dragon, if any dragon could be called typical in this age. It outstripped even the stories of Balerion the Black Dread in sheer size. Old songs claimed Balerion's wingspan could blot out the sun above an entire castle courtyard, but this dragon might do more. It seemed to cast a deeper shadow, and wherever it tread, the ground burned a shade darker. Some half-jestingly called it the Ebony Reaper. Others whispered it was Shadowwrought, a beast blessed by Lawler, the Lord of Light. Jon believed neither rumor wholeheartedly, but could not deny the strangeness he witnessed day by day. He ran a hand along the dragon's flank, feeling the newly rough texture where the scales had fused over older wounds. Heat pulsed beneath his fingers, almost like a living forge. He steeled himself, wondering again if this power was truly his to command or if he was merely a caretaker of something far beyond his control. A distant horn echoed through the valley, drawing Jon's attention. Horses approached from the lower pass, their riders flying House Stark banners. Likely they brought word from Robb, who was stationed at Riverrun with the bulk of the Allied forces, finalizing preparations for a great march south. The Vale had been secured, on paper at least, and time was pressing. Tywin Lannister would not stay idle forever. Already, rumors suggested he was gathering men from the crownlands, reinforcing King's Landing, or forging a new pact with Walder Frey to menace the Riverlands from behind. Jon walked to greet the riders. One of them, a tall man wearing the grey direwolf sigil, inclined his head. "My Lord Snow," the man said. "A message from King Robb." He extended a sealed scroll. "He requests your presence in Riverrun at once. There have been developments." Jon broke the seal and read the hastily penned words, scrawled in Robb's hand. Reports had come in from multiple directions. King's Landing was growing uneasy. King Joffrey had demanded heavier levies from the crownlands, and the city watch was rumored to be on high alert. Pycelle's letters, snippets gleaned from ravens, spoke of the gold cloaks mustering for some kind of major defense. Varys, if the rumors were to be trusted, was quietly cautioning that the city could riot if supplies grew scarce. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister was nowhere to be seen in public but was said to have retreated to the area around the Blackwater, fortifying it. On top of that, there were hints that the Tyrells might ally with King's Landing after all. For if King Joffrey married Margaery Tyrell, the city could be well prophesied. Drastically changing the strategic balance. Robb's letter concluded by urging Jon to come to Riverrun with the dragon, discreetly if possible, but swiftly. The king in the north intended to hold a grand council of allied lords to decide their next steps. Already, some urged a direct strike at King's Landing, calling for the Ebony Reaper, an epithet Jon disliked, to incinerate the Red Keep in a single blazing storm. Others counseled caution, warning that burning the heart of the capital could turn the realm against them. Robb wanted Jon's voice and presence, and the presence of the dragon, to tip the debate. Jon thanked the messenger and nodded to himself. It was time. He turned to regard the black dragon, which had taken off again to circle overhead. The beast soared in lazy loops, as if scanning the land. For the last week, it had flown with a new vigor, its wounds, once so grievous, seemingly erased by some deeper power. That morning, Jon had seen the ragged edges of scar tissue simply flake away, revealing fresh black scales beneath. The old lords, particularly Brynden Tully and Rickard Karstark, had looked on with a mixture of awe and apprehension. More than one had said, "This is no ordinary dragon," in a voice laced with dread. Now, as the scouts turned back toward their vantage, Jon turned to Ser Ardes Waynwood, a Vale knight who had grown marginally comfortable around the dragon. "Prepare your men. We ride for Riverrun. King Robb needs us." The Vale knight looked skyward, swallowing hard at the dark shape overhead. "Very well, my Lord Snow. We'll gather provisions." It took half a day for them to break camp and start the cautious descent from the mountains. The black dragon seemed reluctant to leave its newly claimed roost at first, but when Jon rode east, the beast eventually followed, gliding above the column of riders. The journey down was fraught with the usual difficulties of narrow passes and precarious switchbacks, but no bandits dared harass a group accompanied by such a monstrous guardian. The few times they spotted watchers on cliffs, those figures quickly vanished once the dragon's roar echoed through the canyons. By the time they reached the lower valleys, the entire party was dusty and tired, but their morale was oddly high. Even Vale men who had once regarded Jon with distrust began to see him as their best shield. So long as the Ebony Reaper soared overhead, no Lannister foraging party or rogue sellswords would dare assault them. Still, Jon noticed that fewer men than ever tried to approach the dragon, no matter how many times it landed. Perhaps it was the creature's glowing red eyes, or the stories of how it had waded through Tywin's ranks at Harrenhal. The men's awe had turned to a kind of superstitious reverence. When they finally crossed from the foothills into the rolling farmland of the Riverlands, they found the territory in a slightly better state than before. With Tywin's host scattered or in hiding, the river lords had reopened roads and begun rebuilding. Every once in a while, Jon spied fresh scorch marks on a hill or a burned patch of forest, signs of old battles with the Lannisters or roving outlaws. The North's victory at Harrenhal had not restored peace overnight, but it had at least given the region breathing room. They marched for 4 days, stopping at small keeps that had declared for the Tullus. Everywhere Jon went, men and women gawked at the monstrous black shape in the sky. Twice, local lords petitioned him to burn out nests of bandits, but Jon demurred. He did not want to unleash the dragon's fury over trifling matters, nor risk the beast rampaging. On the second day, during a short flight, the creature took an arrow in its flank from a startled farmer defending his livestock. The arrow simply bounced off the newly toughened scales, leaving not a scratch. Jon landed the dragon to reassure the terrified farmer, an effort that ended with the man half-fainting in fear. Only after a quick explanation and the payment of a few silver stags for the farmer's sheep did the man calm down. It was a sobering reminder that the line between protector and destroyer was razor-thin. At last, the spires of Riverrun's red walls rose on the horizon. Smoke from cook fires drifted lazily above the fortress, and the banners of House Stark and House Tully flew side by side. The black dragon soared ahead of the column, letting out a roar that echoed across the fields, prompting startled cries from the sentries on the ramparts. Jon could almost hear the watchers sighing in relief when they realized the beast was not attacking. They crossed the drawbridge into Riverrun's outer ward, and men rushed to greet them. At the forefront stood Robb Stark, clad in simple travel leathers, gray wind pacing at his side. Robb's face broke into a tired grin when Jon approached. "Brother," he said, pulling Jon into a quick embrace. "You've brought the Vale Knights, I see. Good. We need them." Jon nodded, glancing over Robb's shoulder. "I came as soon as I could after your letter. We have perhaps 200 Vale men with us now. Ser Ardes Waynwood leads them. The rest remain in the Vale, preparing to mobilize." Robb's gaze flicked up to the black dragon as it circled to land in the courtyard. "And your friend is as large as ever. The men say its eyes glow like embers." Jon exhaled. "They do. It's different. Growing stronger, faster, almost with each passing day. Some of my lords want to see it unleashed on King's Landing," Robb said with a wry twist to his mouth. "They say we can end the war in a single night if you rain fire on the Red Keep. But you know as well as I do that it's not so simple. King's Landing is full of innocents, not just Lannisters." Jon nodded. "I fear if we burn the city to the ground, we'd become the very monsters we claim to fight, and half the realm would turn on us for the slaughter of thousands. We must tread carefully." They walked together across the courtyard, the black dragon settling onto a patch of open ground, watchers backing away to avoid the heat radiating from its body. Men murmured, stepping aside to let Jon and Robb pass. Once they were out of earshot, Robb's expression turned serious. "Come inside. We have a war council forming. The River Lords, the Vale Lords, and even some new arrivals from the north. The Great Jon, Lord Bolton, Lord Karstark, and others have been pressing me to act swiftly before Tywin can regroup." Jon gestured for one of his men to see to the horses and followed Robb into Riverrun's main keep. Servants bustled through the corridors, carrying baskets of provisions. The damage done by previous sieges had been partially repaired. Fresh tapestries hung on the walls, and the floors gleamed with newly scrubbed stone. Yet the smell of smoke lingered in places, a reminder of the war that had ravaged these halls. They ascended a broad staircase to the great hall, where a long table had been set with maps. The usual faces were already there. The Blackfish, arms folded, brow furrowed. Rickard Karstark, silent and grim. Roose Bolton, posture impeccable, eyes assessing. The Great Jon loomed near the table, looking impatient. New to the gathering were several Vale Lords, Ser Vardis Egan, Lady Anya Waynwood, and others. Their posture betrayed caution, as though they were not entirely convinced of this alliance. Various River Lords and Northern Lords filled out the rest of the seats, an assembly of a dozen or so men and women who had survived the war so far. As Jon and Robb entered, the conversation hushed. Robb took his place at the head of the table, Jon standing just behind his right shoulder. Gray wind padded along the side, casting suspicious looks at the Vale Lords. Robb cleared his throat. "We're all here now," he said, letting his voice carry in the high-ceilinged chamber. "Thank you for gathering at short notice. My brother Jon Snow has just returned from the Vale, bringing news that Lady Lisa will soon march knights to join our cause, though they number fewer than we hoped. The rest of the Vale stands in readiness but remains cautious. They are not fully committed, but they've at least opened their gates." Rickard Karstark inclined his head to Jon. "So the dragon soared over those mountains after all? I'd have paid to see the look on Lady Lisa's face." Jon allowed a small smile. "She was impressed, though she remains wary." Robb pressed on. "Now, to the matter at hand. Tywin Lannister is reorganizing. We have scattered reports that he's pulling men from the crownlands back toward King's Landing. The boy king, Joffrey, has demanded levies from every loyal house he can. The gold cloaks in the capital are drilling daily. The city is bracing for a siege. Some claim the Tyrells might ally with the Lannisters if offered a royal marriage. Others say Stannis Baratheon, holed up at Dragonstone, might finally make a move by sea, though we have no solid information. Renly Baratheon is still unaccounted for. Some say he's raising an army in the Reach, but that might be rumor." The Great Jon let out a thunderous harumph. "All the more reason to strike now, Your Grace. March on King's Landing while Tywin is still reeling. You have a dragon. Why wait?" Ser Vardis Egen from the Vale frowned. "Burning King's Landing to the ground would make us no better than the Mad King. And what of the thousands of common folk living in the city? We'd sow hatred across Westeros." Roose Bolton's voice slid into the conversation softly. "But if we do nothing, Tywin will use that time to harden defenses, to buy alliances. Perhaps the Tyrells or even the Ironborn. We all recall Theon Greyjoy's uncertain loyalties." Some murmuring broke out at that. Jon knew well that Theon had once been a ward at Winterfell. Where he stood in this conflict was uncertain. The Iron Islands were always quick to exploit chaos for their own gain. Brynden Tully raised a hand. "We have a possible third path. We can lay siege to King's Landing, starve them out, and only use the dragon if absolutely necessary, such as if Tywin tries to break the siege with a large field army. We could ring the capital with the combined might of the North, the Riverlands, and the Vale. Let them wither." The Great Jon barked. "And wait how many months? Years? Men die in sieges, and Joffrey might kill Sansa Stark if he feels cornered. Every day that girl remains a hostage is a day too long." Karstark added in a low voice, "My own sons have died in this war, so I understand the thirst for vengeance. But we must weigh the cost. A direct assault might cost thousands of lives on both sides." Robb's gaze flickered to Jon. "Brother, you have the strongest tie to Sansa. You know we want to free her, not risk her life. And the dragon is in your charge. What say you?" Jon stepped forward, feeling every eye on him. Memories of Sansa, bright-eyed and daydreaming about courtly life, flashed in his mind. He thought of her forced to watch their father's execution. He thought of the horrors that might have befallen her in Joffrey's orbit. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak calmly. "I do not want to see King's Landing burned to ash. That would kill as many innocents as it would Lannister soldiers. Sansa could die in the chaos. The realm would never forgive us, and we'd be seen as the second coming of Ares. All of us know the North is fighting for justice, not tyranny. We cannot become the monsters we oppose. But I also see the danger in waiting too long. Tywin is cunning. If he forges an alliance with the Tyrells, we'll face a fresh army from the Reach and a well-provisioned capital. We might find ourselves outnumbered. The dragon might tip the balance, but it's not invincible. It can be wounded, even killed, if enough archers or scorpions are deployed." Rickard Karstark frowned. "Your friend grows stronger every day, or so the rumors say. Perhaps no scorpion bolt can pierce that hide anymore." Jon shook his head. "Stronger, yes, but not immortal. We can't rely solely on it." Roose Bolton interlaced his fingers, speaking in his measured tone. "Then perhaps a strategy of encirclement is best. We move south with enough speed to prevent Tywin from uniting with the Tyrells. At the same time, we send envoys to treat with Renly and Stannis. Though they both claim the Iron Throne, they share a mutual hatred of the Lannisters. If either can be turned into an ally or at least convinced to remain neutral, we reduce the threat from the south or the sea. Brynden Tully nodded. And if the Tyrells do not formally side with Joffrey, we might even manage a quicker submission. Perhaps the city's gates open before we need to burn anything. The Great John let out a frustrated sigh, but he seemed to grudgingly accept the sense in it. All these words, "Fine, let's try your approach. But if King's Landing spurns us, I say we let the Ebony Reaper turn the Red Keep into slag." Jon winced at the name but did not correct the man. Robb hammered out the details. The Allied forces would muster fully at Riverrun, then move swiftly south. The Vale Knights would arrive in dribs and drabs, but enough had gathered that they could form a strong cavalry wing. The River Lords and the Northern Foot would march behind, with the Black Dragon providing aerial security. Meanwhile, envoys would be dispatched to treat with the Baratheon brothers and the Tyrells, hoping to dissuade them from throwing their weight behind King's Landing. If all else failed, they'd lay siege to the city, but avoid indiscriminate dragonfire, at least at first. The debate carried on for hours, covering supply lines, siege equipment, the unpredictability of Walder Frey, the potential for banditry in the crownlands, and 100 other concerns. By the time Robb dismissed everyone, the torches in the hall were guttering low. Jon's head throbbed with the weight of so many decisions, but he was resolved that Sansa's life, and the lives of countless innocents, demanded caution. Outside, in the courtyard, the Black Dragon sat near the moat, coiled like a monstrous cat. Its eyes glowed that eerie red in the torchlight. Jon approached, noticing that wherever the beast lay, the ground developed black scorch marks, as though the beast's presence alone was enough to burn and sear the earth. Servants gave it a wide berth, and a couple of Vale Knights stood watch at a distance, more to keep curious fools away than to guard against the creature itself. Jon set a hand on the dragon's side. He felt an answering rumble deep in the creature's chest. The scales were warmer than usual, almost uncomfortably hot. A faint vibration traveled from the dragon's flesh to Jon's fingertips, reminding him of the hum of a forge. For a moment, he could almost see flickers of red light dancing behind the scales, like banked embers. Was that merely a trick of the torches or something more? The arrow wounds from Harrenhal were gone, no sign of even a scar. And though it had fought no major battles since, it seemed bigger than ever, as if it continued growing daily. He remembered what the old lords had said. This is no ordinary dragon. Some in hushed corners of the camp even gossiped that it might be possessed by a demon, or that the ancient Valyrian sorceries that once birthed dragons were waking again. Jon knew only that he felt a strange kinship with the beast, but also a mounting disquiet, as though they were both careening toward a fate neither fully understood. That night, unable to sleep, Jon walked the walls of Riverrun, gazing at the fields where tents sprawled beneath the moonlight. Men from a dozen houses had pitched canvas in the meadows, cooking fires sending up a faint haze. The starlight glimmered on the water of the Red Fork. The hush of the late hour was broken only by the occasional clank of armor or the distant howl of a wolf. Jon thought of the north of Winterfell's crypts, and how he had discovered that slumbering dragon beneath the castle. His life had changed irrevocably from that moment. He also thought of his father, Eddard Stark, the man who had raised him to value honor and mercy, and of the truth revealed by Maester Aemon, that he was not Ned's bastard but Rhaegar Targaryen's son. Even now, the notion felt foreign, like a cloak that did not quite fit. He had told few people. Robb knew, of course. Maester Aemon had known. Perhaps the old man had confided in someone else, but Jon kept that circle tight. If the realm learned that a living Targaryen led a dragon under the Stark banner, the politics would become even more convoluted. Some might rally to the Targaryen cause, remembering the old dynasty with a rose-tinted lens. Others would see in it the return of the Mad King's line. For the time being, it was simpler if they believed the Ebony Reaper followed a Stark alone. When dawn broke, the fortress stirred. Robb had called for a general muster. Trumpets echoed, and men assembled. The plan was to depart Riverrun in 2 days, marching south in stages, ensuring supply wagons could keep pace. The Vale Knights would handle scouting ahead, while the dragon provided overwatch from the skies, hopefully deterring any Lannister outriders. Raventree Hall, a seat of House Blackwood, would serve as a rendezvous for forces joining from the eastern Riverlands. After that, they would angle toward the King's Road or what remained of it. Throughout the day, lords approached Jon, each with some version of the same proposition. Why not mount the dragon and fly straight to King's Landing, my lord? Strike a decisive blow. Tywin cannot match that power. It was tempting in its simplicity, like a blade that cut through all the Gordian knots of war. But Jon refused them all. He had promised Robb that they would not become the villains. Burning the Red Keep from above could kill Sansa and thousands of others. It might break the Lannisters, but at what cost? The lesson from Harrenhal was clear. Dragonfire was unstoppable but also indiscriminate. The day wore on, and the heat of summer pressed down upon them. The Black Dragon spent much of the afternoon dozing near the moat. Lords Karstark and Bolton visited Jon there, discussing tactics, apparently eager to glean any clues about the creature's limitations. But each time Bolton edged closer, the dragon growled a low warning. Something about Bolton's presence seemed to rouse its hackles. Jon quietly suspected that the beast sensed a certain coldness in Roos's nature, though that was speculation. In any case, Bolton did not push the issue. Evening arrived. Robb convened a smaller council in one of Riverrun's lesser chambers. Jon was invited, as were Brynden Tully, Rickard Karstark, Roose Bolton, and a handful of others. There, by candlelight, they spread a detailed map of the crownlands. "We have new intelligence from a rider that returned from the south," Robb said, pressing a finger to the area around Rosby and Stokeworth. "Lannister patrols are thick here. They're building barricades on the roads to King's Landing, likely preparing for a siege. Tywin might have 3,000 to 4,000 men garrisoned in the city by now, with more promised from the west." Brynden Tully frowned. "We have more men than that, but not by a huge margin. If the Tyrells side with them, the balance shifts." Rickard Karstark's jaw tightened. "We have about 20,000 total if the Vale arrives in full. And the dragon, that should outweigh any advantage the Lannisters have in fortifications." Robb nodded. "Agreed if we strike before their alliances consolidate. We can't wait for a year-long siege. We risk disease, desertion, and the potential that external forces, like the Ironborn or the Tyrells, flank us." Roose Bolton tapped the map lightly with one pal. "A finger. Then the plan stands. We march with as much speed as we can, capturing lesser strongholds and forging alliances along the way. If we can control the Rosby Road and the approach from Duskendale, we encircle the capital. We keep the dragon in reserve for when Tywin attempts a breakout or if the city's gates remain locked. My men have prepared additional crossbow defenses in case the Lannisters get any foolish notion about using ballistae on your friend, Jon." Jon inclined his head. "Appreciated, but I'll keep the dragon circling high. With each passing day, it seems more impervious to arrow fire." Brynden sighed. "Aye, but that can breed overconfidence. The Mad King was overconfident too, and we know what happened." Robb forced a wan smile. "We won't become that. We stand for the North, for justice, not destruction. Now, unless there's more." He gazed around the table. "We have 2 days to finish preparations. Then we begin the march." Men nodded, and the meeting concluded. Jon left feeling the weight of an inevitable confrontation pulling at him. The next fortnight of marching south would see them break into the heart of the Crownlands. Where would it end? At the gates of King's Landing, or in a swirl of flame and blood? Those 2 days passed in a blur of drilling, packing, and final negotiations. Walder Frey's envoys arrived, spouting half-promises, but in the end it seemed the Freys would not hinder the North's passage. Some said they were stalling for a better offer from Tywin, yet Walder Frey also remembered the humiliations inflicted by the Lannisters in the War of the Five Kings. It remained a balancing act of distrust. Finally, dawn broke on the 3rd day. Trumpets sounded, and the allied host gathered outside Riverrun. Thousands of foot soldiers, cavalry, wagons, and camp followers stretched into the distance. The Black Dragon soared overhead, its silhouette blotting out the sun for a moment, earning cheers and a fair bit of trembling from the ranks. Robb led the vanguard, with gray wind at his side, the stark banners rippling in the breeze. Jon rode near the front as well, though the dragon preferred to circle above or land intermittently. They advanced along the roads that wound past the Red Fork, forging onward under clear skies. Over the next week, they encountered only scattered pockets of Lannister skirmishers. Those handfuls who tried to resist were quickly overrun by the combined might of Vale cavalry or else scattered at the sight of the dragon. At each minor holdfast, the local lords had a choice: declare for the king in the north or risk being considered an enemy. Most chose submission or neutrality. Few wanted to test the Ebony Reaper's flames. Jon watched as these symbolic capitulations mounted. Bows, petty tributes, the unlocking of small gates. It all seemed too easy, a creeping sense in the back of his mind warning that Tywin might be planning something more cunning. One evening, as the army made camp near a gentle bend in the Rosby road, a raven arrived bearing grim news. The Tyrells had declared a betrothal between King Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell, forging an alliance with the Lannisters. Word also claimed that hundreds of wagons loaded with reach grain and supplies were already en route to King's Landing, ensuring the city would be well provisioned. The Tyrell armies, numbering tens of thousands, were rumored to be marching north from Highgarden to bolster the crown's forces. Murmurs of alarm swept through the camp. Robb called an immediate council that night, summoning the key lords to a large field tent. The black dragon crouched a short distance away, content to warm itself by a bonfire. Inside the tent, the atmosphere was tense. Robb read the raven's message aloud, the flickering lantern light reflecting the worry on every face. The Great Jon swore furiously, bellowing that they should have marched straight south from Harrenhal months ago. Bolton's eyes gleamed with a quiet, calculating concern. Brynden Tully let out a heavy sigh. They say the Tyrell host could be as large as ours, if not larger, Robb said, scanning the letter. If they join with Tywin, the Lannisters might outnumber us. Our advantage in morale and the dragon may not be enough if the city is heavily garrisoned and the Tyrell army is fresh. Karstark leaned forward, knuckles on the table. Then we risk a pitched battle where even the Ebony Reaper might not tip the scales. Or they could simply hold inside King's Landing with ample supplies, hoping to draw us into a siege we cannot win quickly. Roose Bolton tapped the table thoughtfully. We might attempt to intercept the Tyrell host before it reaches the capital. If we can defeat them in the field, we still face a battered Lannister host behind walls, but they would not have the Tyrell reinforcements. However, the reach is vast. We do not know which roads they'll take. All roads lead near the Blackwater in the end, Brynden said. They could approach from the Rose Road or cut across the River Road. The crownlands are riddled with tributaries. They might even come by sea with the Redwyne's ships. Robb lowered the letter, face set with grim resolve. We can't fight on multiple fronts. We must hope the Baratheons, Renly or Stannis, distract the Tyrells or sow division among them. But that's uncertain. They might remain idle or worse, pick their own moment to strike. Meanwhile, Joffrey crows from his throne, bragging that he has the might of Highgarden behind him. Jon saw the flicker of desperation in Robb's eyes. The war was pivoting again. Even a monstrous dragon could not be in two places at once. Men around the table murmured suggestions, night raids, scorching the farmland to deny the Tyrell supply, forging alliances with the Stormlands to block them. Nothing seemed guaranteed. At length, the Great Jon slammed a fist on the table. We have the Ebony Reaper. Let the Tyrells come. We'll burn their supply lines, burn their banners, burn their knights. Our men can hold any ground once the dragon unleashes hell from above. Roose Bolton gave him a thin smile. And if the Tyrell knights pepper it with scorpion bolts? If they come prepared with chain shot? Even a beast of legend can be killed with the right weapon. Enough, Robb said, cutting through the bickering. We press on, but we do so with caution. We continue to rally local houses, cut off smaller pockets of Lannister or Tyrell men, and push them back. If the Tyrells commit fully, we'll adapt. The capital cannot hide behind those walls forever. Let's see how Joffrey likes it when an army stands at his gates." The council dispersed, uneasy. Jon stayed behind with Robb. They lingered in the warm glow of the lanterns, the map on the table between them. Robb rubbed a hand over his stubble. "We might be marching to our doom, Jon." Jon frowned. "We have come too far to turn back. The war must end, and Sansa must be freed. The Lannisters will never voluntarily release her, or cede the North's independence." Robb let out a slow breath. "I know. Just promise me, if it all goes to the Seven Hells, you'll do what you can to save her. Even if it means risking the dragon in a direct assault. I cannot lose another sibling." Jon met his gaze. "I'll do everything in my power." They clasped arms, the bond of brotherhood transcending the swirl of politics. Outside, a faint roar drifted across the night. Jon glanced at the tent flaps, picturing the dragon's eyes glinting red in the darkness. He felt the stirrings of destiny yet again, uncertain whether it was a promise of triumph or a warning of doom. The next weeks were a study in controlled advance. Robb's host moved ever southward, capturing minor keeps and forcing them to swear fealty or face the dragon's might. Usually, the mention of dragonfire was enough to compel surrender, and so the Ebony Reaper never had to torch a full castle. Jon was grateful for that, though he felt a twist in his gut each time they used fear as a weapon. The realm was beginning to see them as unstoppable conquerors. Some lords put up no fight at all, opening their gates at the first sight of black wings overhead. Still, Tywin's presence remained elusive. Scouts reported that Lannister banners had withdrawn closer to King's Landing, fortifying outer garrisons and building watchtowers along the Rosby and Duskendale roads. Skirmishes broke out. Bolton's flanking party captured a small Lannister detachment near a village, learning that Tyrion Lannister was rumored to be in the capital, working to bolster its defenses. Another rumor said the Hound, Sandor Clegane, led a brutal pack of Lannister men harrying any peasant who tried to flee the city. The details were maddeningly fragmented. Then came the day they reached the outskirts of Rosby itself, a modest castle sworn to the crown. The Rosbys had a garrison of around 300 men, with rumored support from a small Lannister contingent. Rather than lay siege, Jon soared the dragon overhead in a deliberate show of force. From his vantage, mounted on the beast's shoulders, he could see men on the walls scurrying in fear. Before the Ebony Reaper released any flame, the gatehouse flew a white flag. Rosby surrendered without a single arrow loosed. Robb's cavalry rode in, accepting hostages, ensuring the local lords bent the knee to the king in the north. On one hand, it was an astounding victory achieved without bloodshed. On the other, it solidified the creeping notion that House Stark was now a conquering power not so different from the Targaryens of old. When Jon dismounted in the courtyard, lords came forward to grovel, hoping to avoid a fiery end. The Ebony Reaper hissed, smoke drifting from its nostrils, and the Rosby men actually bowed to it, as though it were some dark deity. Jon felt a wave of discomfort. He had grown up believing in the old gods of the north, in the quiet solemnity of weirwood trees, not in mortal men kneeling to monstrous reptiles. But here he was at the center of this spectacle. Robb arrived soon after, with Grey Wind's muzzle flecked by dust. "No fight, then?" he asked Jon, dismounting. Jon shook his head. "They gave up at the sight of the dragon. It's becoming a pattern." Robb nodded, though a shadow crossed his face. "We push on. Another day or two, and we'll be within a day's march of King's Landing. The city has never looked so vulnerable." That evening, encamped in Rosby's courtyard, the allied lords gathered once more. Robb was restless, pacing the length of a makeshift table while the great Jon downed ale. Karstark quietly sharpened a dagger, and Bolton lounged with an inscrutable half-smile. A tension hummed in the air, as though they stood on the brink of a final confrontation. "We are close," Robb said. "Tomorrow we set out at dawn, aiming to encamp a few miles from the city. Our outriders report that Tywin has sealed the gates, posted archers on the walls, and begun fortifications. The city is said to be brimming with refugees fleeing the crownlands conflicts, likely thousands of frightened souls. Brynden Tully rubbed his temples. Those poor devils. If we besiege the city, they'll starve first. Roose Bolton spoke quietly. If the Tyrell supply trains arrive soon, King's Landing might endure a long siege. Our advantage in morale and the dragon may fade if the men grow weary in the field. Karstark's eyes glinted. Then perhaps a swift demonstration is in order. Show them the Ebony Reaper's flame on an outlying tower or gate. Terrify them into opening their gates. Robb shook his head. That could kill innocents, and once we set the city ablaze, there's no going back. Sansa's within those walls. One errant flame could end her life, or Joffrey might kill her out of spite. Jon spoke up. Sansa's safety is paramount, yes. We cannot lose sight of that. Perhaps we can demand a parley. If they refuse to negotiate for her release, we might consider a limited use of the dragon, destroying a battering ram or a wall section away from the populace. The Great Jon thumped his fist. We must do something. If we simply camp outside their walls, the Tyrells will arrive. We'll be trapped between the city and a new host. Robb sighed. We cannot charge blindly. Let's approach the city with caution. Tomorrow we set our lines. We'll send a herald demanding Sansa's safe release and the crown's surrender. If they refuse, we tighten the noose. Maybe we take a lesser gate tower as a show of force, but no mass burnings. The lords agreed, some reluctantly. Jon thought about the Black Dragon, how it might tear through the city's defenses if let loose. The power to end this war, so close at hand, yet so fraught with moral peril. The next morning, the allied host marched under a clear sky, the Black Dragon soaring overhead. They passed burnt farms and abandoned hamlets as they neared the outskirts of King's Landing. By midday, they could see the city's walls in the distance. The tall turrets of the Red Keep perched on Aegon's high hill, the sprawl of shanties and outer buildings that formed the infamous slums. Plumes of smoke rose from inside the city. Some watchers on the walls must have spotted the approaching dragon, for horns echoed, and the gatehouse bristled with pikes and crossbows. Robb had the men array themselves in a broad semicircle, leaving enough distance to avoid arrow volleys. The Black Dragon circled overhead, ensuring no Lannister sally could surprise them. By mid-afternoon, the lines were drawn. A battered but numerous northern Riverlands Vale host outside the city, the gates shut tight, Lannister banners fluttering defiantly. The rumored presence of the king himself, Joffrey, remained unseen, but scorpions and catapults dotted the ramparts. True to his word, Robb sent a herald under a flag of truce, calling for a parley. He demanded the release of Sansa Stark and the immediate abdication of Joffrey in favor of northern independence and a new order for the realm. The response came in the form of jeers and a few crossbow bolts, thankfully missing the herald, who rode back trembling. Word spread through the northern ranks that no peaceful negotiation was possible. Men muttered about taking the city by force, about letting the Ebony Reaper incinerate the gates. Yet Robb hesitated, remembering Harrenhal's lessons, remembering the vow to avoid mass slaughter. He positioned archers and siege crews at strategic points, prepared for a conventional siege if it came to that, or a partial assault if an opening appeared. Jon spent the evening riding along the lines, keeping the dragon aloft to deter any sudden Lannister sally. He saw the fear in the eyes of peasants who had built crude huts near the walls, likely refugees who could not get inside before the gates closed. They huddled, hungry and terrified, uncertain whether the northern army would spare them or whether the Lannisters inside would ever let them in. Some cried out for mercy, others begged for scraps. A wave of pity and anger rolled through Jon. King's Landing had more than enough horrors without a siege. Yet here they were, forced by war to starve the city into submission. Night fell, and the city glowed with torches, the walls manned by vigilant defenders. The Black Dragon roost near the allied camp, scorching the ground around it. Jon found Robb in the command tent, discussing tactics with the Great Jon, Karstark, Bolton, and Brynden Tully. The plan, as it stood, was to starve the city for a few days. If the Tyrells approached, they'd intercept or move the dragon to break supply lines. But tension hovered in the air. Another raven had come, hinting that the Tyrell host was only a fortnight away, marching relentlessly up the Rose Road. "I can't in good conscience starve the city, but I see no other way," Robb said quietly, his voice hoarse with frustration. "If we attack, we risk Sansa's life and the slaughter of innocents. If we wait too long, the Tyrells arrive, and we could be forced to fight a two-front war. Unless we can force the city to yield quickly, we are stuck." "Let me strike the outer gate with the dragon," Jon offered, though with hesitation in his voice. "I can breach the portcullis or the barbican. Maybe that demonstration compels them to open the gates and surrender. We'd keep the damage localized, no mass burning." The great Jon grinned, though others looked uneasy. Roose Bolton said nothing, but his cold gaze flicked between Jon and Robb, as if gauging how far they'd go. Brynden Tully rubbed his beard. A calculated strike might break their nerve, especially if their defenders realize the Ebony Reaper can come again and again. Robb ran a hand through his hair. "We risk the city going into a panic, a riot that kills Sansa, or spooks Joffrey into madness. But perhaps a single, precise show of force is all we can do." They conferred for an hour, planning the next morning's demonstration. At dawn, Jon would fly the Black Dragon to the main gate on the north side and unleash a short burst of flame. Then the northern archers would deliver an ultimatum. The hope was that seeing stone melt would break morale. They prayed it would not trigger a full-blown panic behind the walls. When morning came, Jon felt a knot of dread in his stomach. He remembered the horrors at Harrenhal, how easily dragonfire reduced men to shrieking shadows. Now, in a city packed with hundreds of thousands, a single mistake could become a holocaust. But he saw no alternative. Robb's face was set in grim lines as he clasped Jon's arm. "Be swift, brother. Show them what awaits if they force our hand further." Jon climbed onto the dragon's back, gripping the ridges of its spine. The creature huffed smoke, its red eyes glowing in the early light. A ring of watchers stepped back nervously, while northern archers formed up behind them. With a great leap, the Ebony Reaper launched into the sky, wings churning the air. Jon guided it toward the city walls, the massive ramparts looming ahead. He could see crossbowmen and scorpion crews tracking the beast's movement. The dragon let out a roar that thundered across the plains. He circled once, scanning for a clear approach to the main gate. Lannister banners flew from the battlements, and he spotted the crest of the city watch. Gritting his teeth, Jon angled the dragon into a shallow dive. Arrows whizzed past. A few clanged off the dragon's scales, leaving no mark. Others fell short. The scorpion bolts, large and barbed, soared up in lazy arcs. One grazed the dragon's flank but glanced off with a shriek of metal, leaving sparks. The creature hissed in anger, and Jon had to pull hard on its ridges to keep it from veering into a savage retaliatory pass. "Easy," he muttered. "Just the gate." He aligned with the massive oak and iron portcullis set into the walls. Soldiers scurried below, some bracing the gates, others leveling weapons at the sky. Jon took a breath and hissed the command he had practiced so many times. "Dracarys." The Ebony Reaper unleashed a torrent of flame that blazed in a wide arc. The gate caught fire instantly with popping and crackling. A portion of the stone arch began to glow red under the intense heat. Screams broke out beneath them. Soldiers scrambled away as the flames roared. Jon yanked on the dragon's spine to lift upward before they incinerated anyone beyond the gate. The beast angled its head, spouting a final plume of fire that licked across the battlements. Some watchers saw their cloaks catch flame, and they dropped to the ground in frantic attempts to smother it. Jon soared away, heart hammering. From above, he saw the gatehouse engulfed. The thick oak turning to char stone blocks radiated a dull glow. Yet the rest of the city was untouched for now. The demonstration was complete. Let them see how easily the Ebony Reaper might reduce the walls to slag if pushed. He circled back, scanning for damage. The gate had collapsed inward, partially opening the city. Yet it was not a wide breach. Rubble and flaming debris blocked easy passage. Archers on the walls shot more arrows into the sky, but they were half broken by terror. Jon guided the dragon back to the Allied lines, ignoring the pounding in his chest. When he landed, Robb and the others rushed up. Karstark's eyes were wide. Gods above. One pass, and the gate is half gone. Jon dismounted shakily. Yes, if they do not yield now, I fear we'll have to tear down the walls. But that will kill many inside. We gave them a chance. A few minutes later, horns sounded from the city. A small, ragged group emerged from the smoldering gate area under a white flag. Among them, a gold-cloaked officer staggered forward, clearly petrified. He announced in a trembling voice that King Joffrey still refused to surrender, but Grand Maester Pycelle and a handful of lesser courtiers begged parley. They offered to negotiate for Sansa's freedom, at least. A wave of cautious relief rippled through the northern ranks. Robb ordered a safe corridor for the negotiators. They arrived in a state of shock, covered in soot, eyes bulging at the sight of the Ebony Reaper perched a short distance away. Grand Maester Pycelle, old and trembling, approached Robb, bowing so low he might have kissed the ground. "I beg you," Pycelle croaked, "spare the city. The boy king, his mind is not well, but many innocents dwell here. We can negotiate terms for the release of the Lady Sansa. We can talk of some arrangement." Robb's mouth set in a firm line. "An arrangement that includes Joffrey abdicating and Tywin ceasing all hostilities, or we bring down these walls." Pycelle's face went ashen. I do not have that authority. I only ask for a stay of your fires while we try to convince the King's Council." "What about Sansa?" Jon demanded, stepping forward. "Has any harm come to her?" Pycelle hesitated, licking his lips nervously. "She is alive, though under guard. I swear, she has not been physically harmed. King Joffrey, well, he's expressed other cruelties, but as far as I know, she remains safe in the Red Keep." Jon's anger flared, but he forced it down. "You have one day to bring me proof of Sansa's well-being. Let her speak to me or to someone I trust. If you fail, we tear down another gate." Pycelle's eyes darted to Robb, seeking mercy. Robb's voice was cold. "Jon's right. 24 hours. Show us Sansa is alive and well. In that time, we hold our fire. If you choose to test our resolve again, the Ebony Reaper will come for your towers next." Pycelle quivered and bowed repeatedly. We shall try. The King's Council is in turmoil, but I will do what I can." With that, the old maester withdrew, accompanied by the trembling courtiers. They returned to the city through the charred remains of the gate. Robb exhaled, glancing at Jon. "We'll see what they bring. If Joffrey remains defiant, we may be forced to break in by force. Perhaps a single breach could let our men storm the city with minimal dragonfire." Jon nodded. "We can aim for a part of the wall away from the main population, but still, we risk a slaughter." Night fell on a city half in panic. The Allied camp was tense with anticipation. Scouts patrolled the perimeter, wary of sabotage or a surprise attack. The Black Dragon perched in full view of the city walls, letting anyone who peered over the ramparts see its looming silhouette. Jon tried to rest, but anxiety twisted his stomach. If Joffrey refused to bend, was Jon truly prepared to burn a path into the city? The realm would never forget such an act. And if they did not act, Sansa might remain Joffrey's prisoner indefinitely. Shortly before dawn, movement stirred at the collapsed gate. A small group emerged under yet another white flag, bearing torches that flickered in the darkness. Jon roused Robb, the Great Jon, Karstark, and a handful of others. They rode out to meet the delegation under truce. The Black Dragon watched from behind, smoke curling from its nostrils. Leading the group was not Pycelle this time, but Tyrion Lannister. The imp, he wore a worn doublet, his mismatched eyes gleaming with exhaustion. Flanking him were a few gold cloaks and a trembling squire holding a lantern. Tyrion dismounted from a stout horse, raising both hands to show he carried no weapon. "I come under flag of truce," Tyrion announced in a wry tone that still carried a hint of dark amusement. "The city is in chaos after your little display. My nephew is quite angry." Robb stared at Tyrion with open hostility. "Where is Sansa?" Tyrion gave a half-bow. "She is in the Red Keep, locked away." Joffrey refuses to release her. However, I've convinced him to allow a gesture. If you'll permit me, I can provide a brief audience, perhaps by the gate, with guards on both sides, so you may see she's alive. Jon's pulse quickened. When? Tyrion shrugged. Later today, if the city doesn't collapse into anarchy first. Riots have broken out in Flea Bottom. My dear sister, the Queen Regent, is trying to maintain order. She's also threatening to do unkind things to Sansa if you continue burning gates. The small folk are terrified. We face the threat of the Ebony Reaper's flame from without and Joffrey's madness from within. Robb's voice was flat. Then you know our terms. Surrender Joffrey's claim, release Sansa, and open the gates. We can negotiate the realm's future. We do not want to kill small folk. Tyrion's eyes flicked to the black dragon's hulking shape. I can see that, and I suspect Joffrey might bend if he had sense, but sense is in short supply. Tywin is rumored to be returning soon, which complicates matters. The king in the north might find himself pincered if you linger. So, shall we keep talking, or will you simply burn us out? Jon bristled at the imp's casual tone. If you want to avoid that, help us free Sansa. Tyrion studied Jon for a long moment. I will do what I can. A rational mind rarely prevails in that nest of vipers, but I prefer not to watch the city burn. If you see Sansa for yourself, will you stay your hand a little longer to give me time to broker something more permanent? Jon looked to Robb, then back at Tyrion. If we see that she's truly unharmed, we can wait briefly. But do not mistake our patience for weakness. Tyrion gave a faint smile. Duly noted, and so an uneasy arrangement was reached. Tyrion returned to the city, promising that by late afternoon, they would bring Sansa under guard to the gate's rubble for Jon to see. If the Ebony Reaper remained perched at a distance and the allied host did not attempt an assault, no harm would befall her. It was a precarious thread of hope. As the sun climbed higher, Jon readied himself. He had a company of archers and knights discreetly positioned behind hills, in case treachery ensued. Robb stood by with a larger force near the center. The black dragon dozed near a scorched patch, watchful but not directly in front of the gates. Jon waited with bated breath, scanning the broken gatehouse for any sign of movement. At last, just past midday, a group of gold cloaks appeared, escorting a covered palanquin. Tyrion Lannister walked beside it, glancing nervously at the horizon. Another figure emerged from behind them. The hound, Sandor Clegane, his burned face twisted in a perpetual snarl, carrying a massive sword. They halted some 20 yards beyond the gate's remains. From the palanquin stepped Sansa Stark, pale and thin, dressed in a plain gown. Even from a distance, Jon could see she had lost much of her girlish brightness. Her eyes looked hollow, ringed with shadows. Yet she stood tall, chin lifted. The sight of her alive spiked a whirlwind of emotions in Jon. Relief, sorrow, anger, guilt. He longed to rush forward and embrace her, but the gold cloaks stood in a tight semicircle, crossbows readied. Tyrion raised a hand. "This is Lady Sansa," he called. "Safe as agreed." Sansa's gaze swept over the field, searching. When she spotted Jon, her lips parted in shock. She must have assumed he was still at the wall or dead. He took a few steps forward, ignoring the cautioning look from Robb. "Sansa!" he shouted, voice tight with emotion. "Are you well?" She nodded mutely, tears shining in her eyes. "Jon, you're here." He came closer, halting when the hound lifted his sword in warning. "I'm here," Jon said, forcing his voice steady. "We're going to free you. We won't let them keep you any longer." Her eyes flicked to the black dragon looming in the distance, a look of awe and trepidation crossing her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but the hound growled, "That's enough. If we stay too long, the king will have our heads." Tyrion frowned at the hound, then addressed Jon. "You see she's alive. She's not been physically harmed, though I can't promise she's been treated well. Joffrey has no love for Starks, but if you hold your forces back, I'll push for her release. It may take some maneuvering, Jon clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. "We'll give you a little time, but not much. If Joffrey touches one hair on her head." Tyrion cut in softly. "I know. Gods help me, I know." He gave Sansa a small nod, as if to say be strong. Then he motioned for her to step back into the palanquin. The Hound, gold cloaks, and Tyrion escorted her away, disappearing behind the rubble. The gates beyond were still partially blocked by scorched timbers, but enough space existed for them to slip through. Then they were gone. Jon stood in silence, heart pounding. Sansa was alive, but imprisoned still. Robb came up behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get her out," Robb murmured. "The question is how, and how long do we wait for Tyrion's negotiations to fail or succeed?" Jon stared at the blackened gate, a swirl of anger and grief twisting inside him. The Ebony Reaper let out a distant roar, as though sensing its rider's turmoil. The city crouched behind those walls, filled with terrified souls, cunning Lannisters, and one captive Stark. The day of reckoning hovered on the horizon, and the black dragon's eyes burned brighter each night, fed by old magic that healed its wounds and hardened its scales. Every day, calls for it to raise the capital grew louder among the old lords. Every day, Jon resisted, trapped between love for his sister, loyalty to his brother, and the knowledge that a single misstep could plunge the realm into a fiery cataclysm. Somewhere in the Red Keep, Sansa waited, her fate hanging on the edge of a blade. Somewhere on the roads, the Tyrells marched, and Tywin Lannister plotted. Somewhere across the narrow sea, whispers might carry talk of a Targaryen leading a monstrous dragon in the lands of Westeros once again. And here, in the shadow of King's Landing, the Ebony Reaper coiled in restless anticipation, its red eyes gleaming with a power that would shape the end of this war, and possibly the fate of every soul in the Seven Kingdoms.